Tonight, we're exploring the complete history of mythical Pokémon origins. This is a fascinating topic, but I'll keep my narration calm to ensure you can still drift off to sleep. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. Imagine a void. Before the tall grass of Kanto, before the snowy peaks of Sinnoh, and long before the first human ever held a Pokeball, there was absolutely nothing. No time to measure the passing moments, no space to contain a single atom, and no light to pierce the infinite dark. In the heart of this silence, a single egg appeared. It didn't come from a nest or a parent. It simply drifted in the nothingness until it hatched, and the first heartbeat of the universe began. This was the birth of Arceus, the alpha Pokémon, the being credited with weaving the very fabric of reality with its 1,000 arms. But as we look closer at the tapestry of Pokémon history, we realize that the story of creation is not a simple straight line. It is a complex, often contradictory web of divine intervention, biological accidents, and human ambition. For decades, trainers and researchers alike used the terms legendary and mythical interchangeably. We spoke of them in hushed tones as if they were one and the same. Gods among monsters. However, as our understanding of the world expanded, specifically around the time of the 5th generation of discovery, a distinction emerged. Legendaries are the titans of history whose names are etched into the geography of our world, their statues in ancient cities, and hear their cries in the storms. But mythical Pokémon are something else entirely. They are the ghosts of the Pokédex. They are beings so rare, so elusive, and so disconnected from the natural order that many people spend their entire lives believing they are nothing more than fairy tales. To find a mythical Pokémon is not just a feat of strength, it is a brush with the impossible. Tonight, we are going to peel back the layers of these impossible beings. We are going to travel back to the very beginning, to that moment of cosmic silence where Arceus first separated the heavens from the earth. We will look at the great original one and the Trinity it birthed, the masters of time, space, and the dark, distorted mirror of our reality. We will ask how one being could create order while another was banished for the sake of that very same stability. But the cosmic scale is only the beginning. As the universe cooled and the planets formed, the mystery shifted from the stars down to the soil. We find ourselves staring into the eyes of Mew, the supposed ancestor of all living things. If Arceus is the architect who drew the blueprints, Mew is the foundation from which all life grew. It is said to contain the genetic code of every Pokémon that has ever walked, flown, or swam. This creates a fascinating tension in the lore. Are Pokémon the children of a divine creator, or are they the products of a singular, miraculous biological ancestor? Our journey will take us through the ancient wars that reshaped the continents. We will witness the primal rage of the land and the sea as Groudon and Kyogre clashed in a battle for dominance, only to be silenced by the Emerald Guardian of the Skies. We will explore the era of the Giants, where Regigigas supposedly pulled the continents into place, using nothing but ropes and sheer titanic will. These are the stories of a world in its infancy, a world being moulded like clay by forces beyond human comprehension. But as the centuries turned into millennia, the nature of mythical Pokémon began to change. They were no longer just cosmic entities or elemental forces. They became intertwined with human history, human culture, and even human cruelty. We will look at the tragic origins of those born from conflict, like the shadows that emerged from the scorched earth of the Kalos War 3000 years ago. We will examine the guardians of Alola, spirits that walk the line between nature and divinity, protecting their islands with a temperamental grace. And perhaps most intriguingly, we will look at the mythical Pokémon that were never meant to exist at all. In the sterile light of modern laboratories, humans attempted to play God. They took the DNA of the ancient ancestor and tried to improve upon it, creating a psychic powerhouse that would eventually question its own right to exist. They forged steel and soul together to create mechanical protectors for royalty, and they accidentally birthed digital entities in the code of our own computers. The history of mythical Pokémon is the history of the world itself. It is a story that spans from the birth of the first second of time to the cutting-edge technology of the 21st century. It is a narrative that blends the sacred and the scientific, the ancient and the artificial. Why does Arceus remain hidden? Why does Mew carry the blueprint for all life? How can a creature made of liquid metal in a mobile game be the key to understanding ancient evolution? These are the questions that define the mythos. As we settle in for this deep dive, we aren't just looking at a list of rare creatures. We are exploring the philosophy of a universe where the line between a monster and a god is often non-existent. We are tracing the lineage of power from the first egg to the latest discovery. So let the world around you fade away. Let the sounds of the modern day drift into the background. We are going back to the void, back to the beginning, to uncover the secrets of the beings that shaped everything we know. This is the complete, chronological, and cosmic history of the mythical Pokémon. Before there was anything at all, there was silence. Not the kind of silence you experience in a quiet room, where you can still hear the distant hum of a refrigerator or the faint rustle of your own breath. This was the silence of the primordial cosmos before the existence of time or space. A stillness so absolute that the very concepts of darkness and light had no meaning, no past, no future, no up or down, no here or there, just an endless, empty void that had never known a single thought, a single word, a single vibration. In that void, something began to take shape, not because there was a force that pushed it, or a will that commanded it, but simply because the potential for existence had always been there, sleeping in the absolute nothingness. And from that potential, a single egg emerged. It was not like any egg you have ever seen, because there was no sun to warm it, no ground to rest upon, no mother to guard it. It simply floated in the void, suspended in a state that was neither fully being nor non-being. Its shell held no colour, for there was no light to illuminate it. Yet it glowed with an inner radiance that was not of this world, because no world yet existed. The emergence of the first one from a single egg floating in absolute nothingness is the oldest story in the Pokémon universe, though it is not a story told by any creature who was there to witness it. It is a story whispered in the ancient writings of the Sinnoh region, etched into stone tablets that predate human memory, and passed down through the mysteries of the creation trio. That first one is Arceus, the being that broke the perfect, silent symmetry of the void simply by existing. When Arceus hatched, the eggshell did not shatter and fall away. Instead, it dissolved into the fabric of what would become reality, scattering fragments of pure energy that would later give rise to the fundamental forces of the cosmos. Arceus did not emerge as a newborn struggling to understand its surroundings. It emerged fully aware, possessing a clarity that transcended thought. And yet for a time there was nothing to perceive. No direction, no distance, no sequence of moments. The void was still silent, but now it was no longer empty, because Arceus was present. And presence demands context. So Arceus began to shape the initial laws of reality using its 1,000 arms. Each arm was not a limb in the way we imagine. They were extensions of Arceus's will, instruments of pure creative intention. With these arms, Arceus wove the first threads of cause and effect, the first scaffolding of spatial dimensions, the first pulse of time. One arm reached out and laid down the principle that something cannot come from nothing, except that it already had. Another arm defined the nature of distance, so that there could be a separation between things. Another arm gave rise to the concept of before and after, so that change could be measured. The 1,000 arms moved in perfect synchrony, each one etching a new law into the blank slate of existence. But these laws were not written on stone or stored in any memory. They were the very structure of reality itself, and as Arceus worked, the void began to take on form. The silence became a canvas, and the arms became brushes. Slowly, the first shapes emerged from the formless. A point here, a line there, a curve that suggested the possibility of motion. And yet, all of this was still happening in a realm where there was no light to see by and no ears to hear. Arceus was alone, the only consciousness in a universe that was just beginning to breathe. The first and most essential creation to come from Arceus's 1,000 arms was the ability to differentiate. Without distinction, there is no reality, only an undifferentiated blur. So Arceus declared that there would be up and down, inside and outside, left and right. But even these were not enough. The cosmos needed a way to hold these distinctions together, a framework that would not collapse back into nothingness. So Arceus used part of its own essence to create the first 3 pillars of reality. Dialga, who would govern the flow of time, Palkia, who would shape the dimensions of space, and Giratina, who would embody the chaotic antimatter that slips through the cracks of order. These 3 were not separate from Arceus. They were extensions of its will, born from the same egg, formed from the same light that had first broken the silence. And then, for a period that cannot be measured in years or centuries because time had only just been created, Arceus rested. The 1,000 arms folded inward, and the first one observed what it had made. The void was no longer empty. There was a pulse of time, a stretch of space, a shadow of antimatter. The silence was still profound, but it was now a living silence, pregnant with the potential of everything that would follow. Arceus had laid the foundation, but the structure was not yet complete. The egg had hatched, the laws were written, and the cosmos was ready for its next great act of creation. That next act is the story of the architect of all, the one who would take the raw laws of reality and sculpt them into the world we know. But that story belongs to another chapter. For now, let the image of that first egg floating in the infinite silence settle in your mind, a single point of light in a vast, dark ocean, holding the promise of all that would ever be. The void had spoken, and its first word was Arceus. In the silence that followed the emergence of the first being, we find ourselves standing at the edge of a paradox. That egg, floating in the absolute void before time itself had a name, gave rise to something the Pokémon world calls Arceus. But here, in this chapter, we must ask a question that has haunted scholars within the Sinnoh region for generations. Is Arceus a Pokémon, or is it something far greater? A cosmic force wearing the shape of a creature for reasons we cannot fully grasp. The distinction is not merely academic. It strikes at the heart of how the Pokémon universe understands its own origins. The old texts preserved in the Canalav library, that ancient repository of Sinnoh's deepest myths, speak of the original one. They describe a being that awoke alone, with no past, no memory, and no purpose except to create. The library's scrolls, written in a dialect that scholars still debate, say that the original one shaped the universe from its own will, not from any pre-existing material, and yet that same being can be encountered, battled, and even caught by a trainer. This is the tension that runs through all of Pokémon mythology. The divine can be captured, the infinite can be contained in a small sphere, and the creator can be summoned to a battlefield. To understand this, we must walk the stone corridors of the Canalav library ourselves, at least in spirit. The book that holds the myth is called the Sinnoh region's oldest surviving manuscript, and its pages are fragile, yellowed, and filled with illustrations that seem to shift when you look at them too long. The text begins with a simple line. In the beginning, there was only chaos. Then from the chaos came an egg. From that egg, the text continues. Emerged a being whose form was not fixed. It could become anything, but for reasons unknown, it chose the shape of a quadruped, a creature of white and gold, with a wheel-like ring around its abdomen. The library's curator, a man who has spent decades studying these texts, will tell you that the word Arceus in the old tongue does not merely mean first or original. It carries connotations of source and authority, but also of presence. The original one was not just a maker, it was the ground of all being, and yet the Pokémon League classifies Arceus as a mythical Pokémon. This classification is relatively modern, solidified in Generation 5, when Game Freak decided to separate the extremely rare, often event-distributed creatures from the broader legendary category. But the lore predates that classification by millennia. In the ancient Sinnoh myths, Arceus is not a Pokémon among Pokémon. It is the only one of its kind, a singular entity that exists outside the categories we impose. The library texts emphasize that after creating the universe, Arceus withdrew, leaving behind fragments of its power in the form of other beings. Those fragments we call Pokémon. But Arceus itself remained apart, watching, until the flow of time and the unfolding of events somehow made it accessible to human perception. This philosophical implication is profound. If a creator deity can be caught and commanded, then what does that say about the nature of divinity in this universe? Some theologians in the Pokémon world argue that Arceus allows itself to be caught as a test of humility, a way to remind mortals that even the greatest power can be entrusted to a child with a kind heart. Others suggest that the act of catching Arceus is an illusion, that what you catch is merely a physical avatar, a projection of the true cosmic force into the limited dimensions of our reality. The creature in your party might be a vessel, not the source itself. The Canalav text hint at this. They say that the original one walked among its creations but is never truly of them. As you stand in that library, the faint smell of old paper and candle wax filling the air, you might notice a particular illustration that has puzzled researchers for centuries. It shows Arceus surrounded by 3 smaller figures, each radiating a different color: time, space, and antimatter. These 3, the text says, were the first children of the original one, born not from an egg, but from a command. And with their birth, the universe took on structure. Dialga set the rhythm of moments, Palkia stretched the fabric of distances, and Giratina became the shadow that exists where order breaks down. But that story belongs to the next chapter, to the moment when the void became a cosmos, and the chaos found its first boundaries. For now, consider what it means that a being capable of creating time, space, and the very substance of reality can be encountered in a game. The Pokémon world is one where the sacred and the mundane coexist without conflict. You can pray to Arceus in the ancient temple of Sinnoh, and you can also send it out to battle Eradicate. This paradox is not a flaw in the lore. It is the very essence of what makes mythical Pokémon so compelling. They blur the line between myth and mechanics, between story and system. The architect of all chose to be part of the architecture it designed, and that choice is the foundation of every legend that follows. As the library's lanterns flicker, casting long shadows across the reading table, you turn the page. The next section speaks of the birth of the Trinity, the 3 beings who would shape the universe we know. But that is a tale for another night, a tale where the silence of the void gives way to the first tick of a clock and the first breath of an infinite expanse. The story of the original one is only the beginning. What comes next is the story of how the universe found its shape and how the first cracks of chaos were sealed away. And so we leave the Canalave library, where the parchment spoke of a single being and an egg in the void. Arceus, the original one, is not merely a Pokémon to be captured, nor a force to be worshipped. It is the origin point, the moment before anything else existed. But if you are the only thing in all of nothing, what do? You create. And what Arceus created next would define the very fabric of everything we now call reality. From its own substance, from the light that radiated from that first egg, Arceus brought forth 3 beings, not servants, not children, but pillars, each one born with a single purpose, to hold a fundamental aspect of existence in balance. The first was Dialga, and with its birth, time itself began, not as a clock ticks, but as a river that had no source until that moment. Dialga did not merely measure time, yet the flow past, present, future, all woven into a single crystalline instant. The second was Palkia, and where Dialga gave sequence, Palkia gave room. Space expanded outward from a single point, every direction suddenly possible. Palkia is the architect of distance, the reason you can be here and not there. Together, these 2 took their thrones at the heart of the cosmos, and the universe began to breathe. But a third creation was needed, one that would ensure stability, a counterbalance, a foundation. That was Giratina. Where Dialga governed the forward march of moments and Palkia governed the endless stretch of dimensions, Giratina was given the realm of antimatter, the very substance that anchors the ordering of reality. Without Giratina, matter would have no opposite, no reference point. It was the final piece of a divine equation, the force that keeps the universe from collapsing into chaos. And in that moment, the Trinity was complete. The dimensions were no longer abstract possibilities. They had rulers. Time ticked, space stretched, and matter held its shape. The cosmos was alive. But even in creation there is a shadow. Some forms of order are too perfect, and what lies outside them becomes a threat. That shadow, that exile, is where our story leads next. For when the Trinity took their thrones, one of them was not meant to stay. In the next chapter, we will descend into the distortion world and uncover the truth of the Banished Shadow, what it means to be cast out from the world you helped create. Of the 3 beings born from Arceus, 2 were given names that would become synonymous with order: Dialga, the embodiment of time, and Palkia, the keeper of space. The third was named Giratina, but it was never given a role in shaping reality the way its siblings were. Its domain was antimatter, the opposite, the negation, the shadow that must exist for light to have meaning. In the earliest moments after creation, the universe was a raw and unstable thing. Time had not yet learned to flow forward, space had not yet discovered its own edges, and Giratina, filled with a power that could unmake what its brothers had made, began to act not out of malice but out of instinct. It pushed against the boundaries of reality, testing the fabric of existence. It did not destroy for pleasure, but its very nature was corrosive to the structures Dialga and Palkia were carefully building. Arceus watched, and as the other 2 worked to bring order to chaos, Giratina's presence became a growing threat to the fragile architecture of the cosmos. It was not evil, but it could not be controlled. Its descent into violence was not a choice. It was an inevitability built into its essence. Every time it struck at the walls of reality, it left cracks. Every crack threatened to undo the expansion of space and the flow of time. And so Arceus made a decision that would echo through all of history. It did not destroy Giratina, for that would unbalance the fundamental forces of the universe. Instead, it banished the Third-Born to a place where its power could not endanger the physical world. That place would come to be known as the Distortion World. But understand this, the Distortion World was not created as a prison in the human sense. It was a structural necessity, a parallel dimension where antimatter could exist freely without collapsing the reality we inhabit. Think of it as the underbelly of creation, a mirror where the laws of physics are inverted, where gravity shifts direction, where up and down become suggestions rather than rules. Without this realm, the universe would have torn itself apart. The Distortion World was as essential to existence as time and space themselves. In that place, Giratina was not merely locked away, it was given dominion. It became the guardian of antimatter, maintaining the balance of all things by simply being what it was. The Distortion World was its kingdom, its purpose, its reason for being. Arceus did not exile Giratina out of anger or fear. It exiled it out of necessity, because no other place in all of creation could hold the force it represented. This is why the renegade Pokémon is so often misunderstood in the myths that survive today. To call Giratina violent or destructive is to see only the surface. Its role is not to harm the physical world, but to preserve an equilibrium that would otherwise collapse. The Distortion World is not a punishment. It is a counterbalance, a shadow dimension that anchors the light of reality. Without it, the creations of Dialga and Palkia would be incomplete, fragile, vulnerable to their own internal contradictions. Giratina's exile was the moment the universe found its final peace, and in the silence of that shadow realm, a new kind of force began to stir. One that would eventually emerge not from the void, but from the heart of the world itself. That story, the story of a spirit woven into the very fabric of existence, is where we must turn next. With the Distortion World sealed away, the universe had its three fundamental pillars: time, space, and the antimatter that keeps both in balance. But a universe, not merely a stage. It must be felt, understood, and shaped by something that can witness it. That is where the next act of creation begins. Arceus, the original one, looked upon the empty cosmos and saw that it was perfect in its form, but hollow in its meaning. The stars burned, the planets turned, the currents of time and space flowed effortlessly. Yet there was no being to marvel at the dance, no mind to question why the stars exist, no heart to yearn for more. So the Creator set forth a second wave of existence, one that would breathe consciousness into the fabric of reality itself. From the depths of three lakes that would one day be known as Lake Acuity, Lake Valor, and Lake Verity, there emerged three beings, each a fragment of Arceus's own essence, but each focused on a single, essential attribute of the soul. The first to appear was Uxie, the being of knowledge. It emerged from the still waters, not with a roar or a flash of light, but with a quiet presence that seemed to draw all information into itself. In that moment, the universe gained its first witness. Not just an observer, but a knower. Uxie understood the names of all things, the patterns of cause and effect, the secrets hidden in the atomic dance of every particle. And with that knowledge, it could bestow the gift of awareness upon the living creatures that would soon populate the world. Next came Mesprit, the being of emotion. Where Uxie was calm and analytical, Mesprit was a ripple of feeling, a pulse of joy and sorrow and wonder. It rose from its lake, not as a detached observer, but as a being that could feel the weight of existence. Mesprit brought the capacity for love, for fear, for longing, for hope. Without it, the world would have been a cold place, a machine running on logic, but devoid of the warmth that makes life worth living. And finally, Azulf, the being of willpower. It erupted from its lake with a fierce determination, the spark that drives every choice, every act of defiance, every moment of courage. Azulf gave living beings the ability to act, to push forward, to resist, to create. Willpower is what transforms knowledge into action and emotion into purpose. Together, these three became the Lake Guardians, and they were sent across the world to touch the minds and hearts of all living creatures. But It was not simply a matter of releasing them into the wild. The Lake Guardians each carried a unique power, a touch that could awaken consciousness in whatever they encountered. Uxie would brush a creature and grant it the ability to learn, to remember, to ask questions. Mesprit would touch another and fill it with the spectrum of emotional experience, from the deepest grief to the highest ecstasy. Azelf would lay its influence upon a being and give it the resolve to chase its dreams, to stand up against adversity, to choose its own path. And so, over countless ages, these three beings wove the fabric of sentience into the world. They did not create life itself. That task belonged to other forces, perhaps Mew or the primordial energies of the planet, but they made life aware. They turned mere existence into experience. The first Pokémon that crawled from the primordial seas did not simply survive. It began to feel hunger, to remember where food was found, to will itself toward the warmth of the sun. Now here is the deep connection that ties the Lake Guardians to the heart of humanity and to every intelligent species in the Pokémon world. The ancient texts of Sinnoh, preserved in the Canalov Library, speak of a legend that humans and Pokémon were once the same, sharing a common soul. And the three beings, Uxie, Mesprit, Azelf, are said to contain within themselves the very essence of what makes a creature a person. Knowledge without emotion is sterile. Emotion without will is fleeting. Will without knowledge is blind. But when all three are present, you have the spark of consciousness, the thing that separates a mere animal from a being that can ponder its own existence. This is why the Lake Guardians are not distant, abstract deities. They are intimately bound to every creature that thinks, feels, and chooses. When a child Pokémon takes its first step toward its trainer, that is Azelf's gift of will. When a trainer bonds with their partner and feels a surge of love, that is Mesprit's touch. When a scientist discovers a new evolution method, that is Uxie's light illuminating the path. The three are not just guardians of lakes. They are the guardians of the inner world. The relationship goes even deeper. The lakes themselves are places of meditation and reflection. In the games, you visit each lake to encounter the legendary Pokémon, but the journey is as much internal as external. You have to navigate caves, solve puzzles, and prove your worthiness. This is a metaphor for the search for knowledge, the confrontation with emotion, the test of will. And when you finally stand before the being, it is not a battle of destruction. It is a meeting of equals. The Lake Guardians seem to recognize something in you, something that mirrors their own essence. There is a reason these three are often called the Lake of the Mind, the Lake of the Heart, and the Lake of the Spirit in fan interpretations. The official lore refers to them as the beings that gave the world spirit, and spirit in this sense is the animating force that allows life to transcend mere biology. It is the reason a Pokémon can feel loyalty, can dream of becoming stronger, can sacrifice itself for others. All of that begins with the touch of the Lake Guardians. As the world filled with conscious beings, the stage was set for the next phase of myth. The universe now had time, space, matter, and mind. But there remained a question. If consciousness arose, then what about the origin of life itself? Where did the first living creatures come from? And how did they inherit the ability to carry the spirits bestowed by Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf? The answer to that question leads us to a being whose existence challenges everything we think we know about origins. A Pokémon that carries the genetic blueprint of all life, and yet is shrouded in as much mystery as the original one itself. That story, the story of the first true ancestor, is where we will turn our attention in the next chapter. With the gift of consciousness now woven into the fabric of life, the world began to stir. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf had planted the seeds of mind and heart into every creature, but they had not yet determined the shape of those creatures. That task belonged to something far older and far more mysterious, something that existed before the first stone was laid, before the first star began to glow, something that carries the genetic blueprint of every Pokémon that would ever walk, swim, or fly across the face of the earth. The mystery of Mew is a paradox that sits at the very heart of Pokémon mythology. On one side, we have the grand cosmic narrative of Arceus, the original one, creating the pillars of reality. On the other, we have Mew, a small pink, cat-like creature that folklore insists is the ancestor of all Pokémon. It is not a creator of universes. It does not govern time or space. Yet within its cells lies a code so complete that every other Pokémon, from the humblest Magikarp to the mightiest Rayquaza, can trace its lineage back to Mew. How can two such contradictory origin stories coexist? Is Mew the biological vessel through which Arceus's creation was made manifest? Or did Mew arrive after Arceus, a kind of genetic echo of the first creation? To answer that, we must consider what Mew actually is. In the scientific records of the Pokémon world, Mew is classified as a mythical Pokémon, and its existence is considered the holy grail of genetics. It is said to contain the DNA of every Pokémon that has ever existed, and perhaps every Pokémon that ever will. This claim is not mere legend. It is backed by decades of research, most famously by the scientists who used Mew's DNA to create Mewtwo. That alone suggests that Mew is not a product of evolution in the normal sense. It did not arise from a long chain of ancestors. Instead, it appears to be a source, a wellspring of biological possibility. And here we encounter the first layer of the paradox. If Mew is the ancestor, then it must have existed before all other Pokémon. But if Arceus created the universe and all life within it, then Mew must be one of Arceus's creations. So which came first? One school of thought, rooted in the ancient writings of the Sinnoh region, places Mew as a later creation. Arceus first brought forth Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina to shape the fabric of reality. Then came Uxie, Mesprit, and Azulf to bestow spirit. After that, according to certain lost tablets found in the ruins of Alph, Arceus may have created Mew as a kind of living library, a repository of all possible genetic forms, so that life could diversify and adapt to any environment. In this timeline, Mew is the biological vessel of creation, not the source. It is the tool through which Arceus's original design could be refined and expanded. Mew's role would then be to serve as a bridge between the divine act of creation and the messy evolving world of mortal Pokémon. But another, older tradition, one whispered by the nomadic peoples of the Kanto region, suggests a different order. They tell of a time before the world had formed, when nothing existed but a single silent void, and in that void, a small pink creature floated, dreaming of life. That creature was Mew, and from its dreams, the universe began to take shape. In this version of the story, Mew is not a creation of Arceus. It is the primordial consciousness that preceded even the original one. Arceus, in this telling, might be a manifestation of Mew's will, a constructor built from the raw stuff of Mew's dreams. This interpretation is far less common in official Pokémon lore, but it persists in esoteric circles and among those who study the ancient cave paintings found in the Sevii Islands. It presents Mew as the true first being, with Arceus as a subsequent architect. The evidence for either timeline is frustratingly thin. Mew itself does not help. It is one of the most elusive creatures in all of Pokémon, capable of teleporting across continents in an instant, turning invisible, and reading the thoughts of anyone who tries to approach. It has been sighted in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, in the ruins of ancient temples, and even in the laboratories of determined scientists. But no one has ever captured it, not truly. It always seems to have its own agenda. This elusiveness is more than just a quirk of biology. It is a deliberate trait, a sign that Mew exists in a realm beyond our understanding. It is the bridge between myth and biology, a creature that belongs both to the world of science and to the world of legend. It can be studied, but never fully understood. Perhaps the most telling detail is that Mew does not age. It has been alive for millennia, perhaps since the very dawn of the Pokémon world. Its DNA is so stable and so flexible that it has no need for evolution. It simply is. And that permanence suggests that Mew is not a product of evolutionary history, but a foundation upon which evolution was built. In a way, Mew is the memory of the universe, carrying within itself the blueprint for every form that could ever exist. That is why the debate over its place in the timeline matters so deeply. If Mew came after Arceus, then creation was a top-down process. A divine being designed a world and then filled it with life. If Mew came before, then creation was a bottom-up process. Life itself, in its most basic form, dreamed the cosmos into being. Both possibilities are awe-inspiring, but they lead to very different understandings of the Pokémon world. The first gives us a universe of order, where all life is the result of a single, intelligent design. The second gives us a universe of chaos, where consciousness emerged from a primordial soup of potential and then shaped the world around it. And Mew, sitting at the center of this paradox, offers no answers. It simply exists, smiling its enigmatic smile, content to let the mystery deepen. As we move forward, we must remember that Mew is not the only creature that shaped the Earth. The mountains, the oceans, the continents themselves were molded by forces even older than Mew, forces that arose from the very fabric of the planet after the cosmic creation had settled. And these forces have names: Groudon, Kyogre, Regigigas. Their stories are about to unfold in the shaping of the Earth itself. As we turn away from the mystery of Mew, from the genetic thread that binds all life together, we find ourselves facing a different kind of origin. Mew may carry the blueprint of every living creature, but the world itself, the physical stage upon which those creatures would walk, had to be shaped. And that shaping was not a quiet biological process. It was violent, deliberate, and it required a force unlike anything the young planet had yet seen. In the age before continents drifted apart, when the land was a single chaotic mass, there came a being of immense, almost incomprehensible strength. Its name would echo through the ages as Regigigas. This was no mediator, no subtle force of nature. Regigigas was a mover, a shaper, a being whose very purpose was to take the raw, unformed earth and wrestle it into order. The legends say it emerged from a deep slumber, rising from beneath the primordial crust, and what it did next would define the geography of the entire world. Regigigas laid its hands upon the land itself. With a grip that could crush mountains, it began to pull. It seized the great masses of stone and soil, dragging them across the face of the planet, separating them, positioning them into the distinct continents we recognize today. Imagine the sound of that labor, the grinding of tectonic plates, the roar of splitting rock, the deep groaning of the earth as it was forced into a new shape. Each pull was a monumental effort. Each step left a trail of valleys and ridges. The world was being sculpted by raw, brute force, and Regigigas did not stop until the continents were in their places, until the land masses had drifted apart, leaving oceans between them. But such a task required solitude. Regigigas could not be everywhere at once, and so it created guardians, beings fashioned from the very elements it had moved. From clay, it formed a titan of rock, unyielding and patient. From magma, it cooled a titan of steel, strong and unbreakable. From ice, it shaped a titan of eternal frost, cold and aloof. These were the Regis, Regirock, Registeel, Regis. They were not meant to rule, but to watch, to guard the places Regigigas had shaped, to ensure that nothing disturbed the new order of the world. For a time they stood silent, statuesque, scattered across the continents like sentinels of a completed work. Yet the power that had shaped the earth was also a power that could unmake it. Ancient civilizations rose, and they witnessed the Titan's strength. They saw Regigigas moving mountains, saw the Regis commanding elements with a mastery that dwarfed human ambition, and they grew afraid. Fear, as it so often does, turned to action. These ancient peoples, perhaps the same ones who would later build empires and temples, decided that the giants could not be allowed to walk freely. They built structures, sealed chambers, and with rituals now lost to history, they trapped the Regis. Regigigas itself was bound in a place of isolation, deep within a snowy mountain, its power locked away behind doors of stone and ice. The giants slept. The continents held their shape. The world moved on, unaware of the titans that slumbered beneath its surface. But the earth had been shaped, and the forces that shaped it were not gone. They were waiting, dormant, for the moment when the balance would tip again. And that moment would come, not from the cold sleep of a giant, but from a different kind of primal chaos, with the continents now anchored into place, and the great golems of Regigigas resting at the ends of the earth. The world began to breathe. The land had shape, the seas had boundaries, but the forces that would give those boundaries meaning had not yet awakened. Deep beneath the crust, in chambers of molten rock that had never felt the touch of sunlight, a sleeping titan stirred, and in the abyssal trenches, where the pressure could crush stone into dust, another presence opened its ancient eyes. Groudon rose first. The Earth's core, that furnace at the heart of the planet, was its cradle. For eons, Groudon had slumbered in magma, absorbing the primordial heat that had once shaped the continents. But now, with the world above finished in form but empty of purpose, something called it upward. It was not a command nor a voice. It was a pull, a need for expansion. Groudon emerged from a fissure that split a mountain range in half, throwing ash and fire into the sky for days. Its body was a mass of red and black armor, glowing with geothermal energy. When it stood on the surface for the first time, the land itself seemed to sing. Cracks sealed, deserts stretched, rock formations grew like trees from the soil. Groudon was not just a creature of the earth. It was the embodiment of the land's will to increase. Far below, in the deepest ocean trenches, Kyogre felt the shift. The sea had always been the counterbalance to the land, a vast, cold and limitless expanse. But with Groudon's emergence, the oceans began to recede in places, shrinking as the land expanded. To Kyogre, this was an affront. Its sleep had been undisturbed for millennia, cradled by the weight of water and the silence of the abyss. Now a tremor of dryness reached it, a whisper that the world above was shifting towards stone and dust. Kyogre did not think in the way we understand thought. It knew only its purpose, to expand the sea, to drown the land, to make the world a single endless ocean of blue. And so it rose, breaching the surface in a storm of foam and lightning. Its body was the color of the deep, with patterns like luminous clouds swirling across its skin. The moment Kyogre broke the surface, rain began to fall. Not a gentle rain, a deluge that did not stop. The first conflict between Groudon and Kyogre was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was a war of wills expressed through the elements. Groudon walked the continents, and wherever it stepped, the ground swelled, mountains surged upward, and deserts baked into hardpan. Kyogre swam the seas and pulled storms behind it like a cloak. The rain became global. Rivers overflowed. Coastal cities that would one day be built were submerged before they could exist, and the sky turned a permanent grey. For every mile of land Groudon created, Kyogre raised the sea level by a mile. It was a tug of war over the planet itself, and neither could win because neither could destroy the other. They were forces, not fighters. They could not kill each other any more than fire can kill water, but they could reshape the world until it was unrecognizable. This was not a war for territory in the sense of borders or kingdoms. It was a war for the very definition of existence. If Groudon won, the world would become a single continent, arid and bare, with no oceans to soften its edges. If Kyogre won, all land would be drowned, and the planet would be nothing but an endless sea under an eternal storm. There was no room for compromise between the two. Their conflict had no diplomacy, no negotiation, only the primal push and pull of earth and water. For centuries, or perhaps for only a handful of years, time moved strangely in that age. The battle continued. The land changed shape daily. Coastlines vanished and reappeared. Species that had just begun to evolve were wiped out before they could leave a fossil record. And all the while, a third being watched from above. High in the ozone layer, where the air is thin and the sun burns without mercy, Rayquaza circled the planet. It had been there since the beginning, a serpent of emerald scales and crimson fins drifting through the upper atmosphere like a living constellation. Rayquaza was not born of earth or sea. It belonged to the sky, to the boundary between the world and the void. Its purpose was not to create or to destroy, but to maintain balance. And the battle between Groudon and Kyogre was tearing that balance apart. The storms churned by Kyogre reached even into the stratosphere, and the volcanic ash from Groudon's eruptions darkened the ozone. The sky itself was sickening. Rayquaza did not descend immediately. It observed, patient as the moon, waiting for a moment when the conflict reached its peak. That moment came when Groudon and Kyogre met on a stretch of land that had become an island, only to have the island sink into a new sea, only to have the sea recede as Groudon raised the land again. They were locked in a cycle of creation and destruction, each unable to overpower the other, but each unwilling to stop. And in that moment of perfect deadlock, Rayquaza descended. It fell from the sky like a meteor of green fire, cutting through the storm clouds. With a sonic boom that silenced the thunder, Rayquaza's descent was not violent, not angry. It was absolute. It landed between Groudon and Kyogre, its long body coiling around them both, and it let out a cry that was felt, not with the ears, but with the bones. That cry was a command. It said, "Stop," and the land and sea listened. Groudon sank back into the earth, not defeated but contained. Kyogre submerged into the ocean depths, not conquered but calmed. The rains stopped. The volcanoes fell silent. The sky cleared, and for the first time in a long age, the sun shone on a world that was neither all land nor all sea, but a fragile mixture of both. Rayquaza did not linger. It ascended again, back to its perch in the ozone layer, where it would remain for millennia, watching, waiting, because it knew that the conflict between land and sea was not a one-time event. It was a cycle. The forces that Groudon and Kyogre represented would awaken again, and when they did, Rayquaza would be there to quell the storm once more. The world settled into its new shape. Continents stayed where they were placed. Oceans kept their shorelines. Life began to diversify in the spaces that had been so violently contested. But the memory of that primal chaos lingered in the earth itself, in the fossils of deep-sea creatures found on mountaintops, in the salt flats where ancient seas once stood, in the volcanic rock that still held the heat of Groudon's rising, and somewhere in the legends told by later civilizations, the story was preserved, not as history but as myth, the story of the great continent maker and the ocean lord and the sky serpent that brought peace. That peace, however, was not the end. It was only the prelude to a deeper question. If the land and sea could be tamed only by a force from above, then what of the forces that govern time and space, or the beings that carried the very fabric of consciousness? The world had its shape now, but it did not have its name. That would come later, when the legends stopped being mere stories and started being definitions. And that brings us to the next chapter of this ancient story, the chapter where we begin to separate the truth from the myth, where the boundaries between fact and fable are drawn in the sand of a world still cooling. Up next is Chapter 9, Defining the Mythical. The ancient battle between Groudon and Kyogre left the world scarred and reshaped, but it also marked a turning point in how we understand the creatures that walk it. For generations, the line between what is simply rare and what is truly otherworldly remained blurry. It wasn't until the 5th generation of Pokémon discovery that the scientific community finally drew a hard line in the sand. Before that, all extraordinarily powerful or unique Pokémon were grouped under a single banner, legendary. But as more and more strange beings surfaced, beings that seemed to exist only in fragmented eyewitness accounts, fleeting photographic evidence, or whispered rumors, a new category became necessary, and so the term Mythical Pokémon was officially born. The distinction is not about power, it is about presence. Legendary Pokémon, like Groudon and Kyogre, are documented parts of the natural world. They can be encountered, studied, and even captured under the right circumstances. Mythical Pokémon, however, exist in a different realm entirely. They are the mirages of the Pokémon world. Their very existence is doubted by many scholars, dismissed as folklore, or at best unverified rumors. To encounter a mythical Pokémon is to step outside the bounds of ordinary experience. This skepticism is rooted in history. In the real world, the first mythical Pokémon ever distributed was Mew. When Pokémon Red and Green launched in Japan in 1996, rumors spread like wildfire. Players whispered about a secret Pokémon hidden under a truck near the An urban legend told of a way to encounter Mew without any official event. The Mew under the truck story became one of the most enduring myths in gaming history. It was false, of course, but it reflected a deeper truth, the desire to believe in something beyond the known. Game Freak leaned into this mystery. They began distributing Mew only through special official events, in-person giveaways at Nintendo events, mailing contests, or later through limited-time Wi-Fi distributions. This pattern set the standard for every mythical Pokémon that followed. You could not find them in tall grass. You could not trade for them easily. You had to be in the right place at the right time, often across the globe, or wait years for a second chance. And so the doubt grew. If a Pokémon can only be obtained through a single weekend event in New York in 1999, how can it be considered a known species? Many in the Pokémon world itself treat mythical Pokémon as stories told to children. In the games, characters often express uncertainty. A scientist might say, "I've heard of a Pokémon called Celebi, but nobody has ever proven its existence." The official Pokédex entries for mythicals are often written in a speculative or even legendary tone, reinforcing the idea that these creatures hover on the edge of reality. This tension between belief and evidence is what makes the category so fascinating. It is a deliberate framing device, one that mirrors the ancient myths from which the term mythical is borrowed. Just as our own world has tales of unicorns and dragons, the Pokémon world has Mew, Celebi and Arceus. And just as some cultures accept these stories as truth and others as metaphor, so too do the inhabitants of the Pokémon universe disagree. The shift in Generation 5 was not just a marketing decision, it was a narrative choice. By formally separating mythical from legendary, Game Freak acknowledged the layered nature of their own lore. Legendaries are the visible gods, the forces of nature you can track and fight. Mythicals are the hidden ones, the ones that operate behind the veil. They are the faint footprints in the sand, the impossible photographs, the rumors that refuse to die. And perhaps the most fitting mythical of all is Celebi, a creature of time, a wanderer through centuries, appearing only in moments of crisis or peace. Celebi's story flows like a river from the ancient past to the modern day, touching on events that seem disconnected until you see the whole. That is the beauty of the mythical category. It invites you to question everything you thought you knew. In the next chapter, we will follow the Ripple Celebi leaves behind and discover why this time-traveling sprite might hold the key to the entire mythology of the Pokémon world. And so, from the reclassification that separated the mythical from the legendary, we arrive at a being who embodies the very reason that distinction exists. A creature whose existence is not merely rare, but paradoxically woven into the fabric of past, present, and future. The voice of the forest, the time-travel Pokémon, Celebi. If the mythical category was born from the idea that some Pokémon are whispered about but never confirmed, then Celebi is perhaps its most fitting inhabitant. Because how do you confirm a creature that might not exist in the same moment you are looking for it? How do you prove what is real when reality itself is a river and Celebi swims through every part of it at once? Celebi's role is not simply to travel through time, it is to guard the purity of time itself. Think of time not as a straight line, but as a great living forest. Each moment is a tree, each era a grove, and Celebi is the caretaker, moving among the roots and branches, ensuring that no blight spreads, no wound festers across the centuries. It does not merely observe history. It protects the health of the natural world across all eras simultaneously. When a forest withers in one timeline, Celebi has already planted the seeds that will bloom in another. When a catastrophe threatens to erase an entire epoch of growth, Celebi arrives before the first flame ever touches a leaf. This is not the flashy manipulation of time we might imagine. There are no dramatic rewinds, no grand battles over the timeline. Celebi's work is subtle, quiet, and utterly essential. It is the reason the same ancient tree still stands in the heart of a forest, 10,000 years after it first sprouted. It is the reason a flower that should have gone extinct still blossoms in a hidden glade. Celebi moves like a gentle breeze through history, nudging, healing, and preserving. It is in every sense the guardian of nature's continuity, and continuity in a universe of chaos and creation is a sacred charge. But to understand how Celebi is perceived, we must travel to a specific place, the Ilex Forest. Deep in the Yoto region, this ancient woodland is home to a shrine unlike any other. Moss-covered stones, worn by rain and time, surround a small altar. Offerings are left there even now. In the games, in the lore, in the hearts of those who know the old stories. The shrine is dedicated to Celebi, and it tells us something profound about the culture that reveres the time travel Pokémon. The shrine is not a place of worship in the traditional sense. It is a place of invitation, a spot where, if you are pure of heart and the forest is willing, you might glimpse a being that exists between moments. The Ilex Forest itself is said to hold a special connection to time. Certain trees there are impossibly old, their rings stretching back to eras before recorded history, and at the center of it all, the shrine stands as a reminder that time is not a wall, but a doorway. In Japanese folklore, there is a deep reverence for spirits that protect forests and natural landmarks. Kadama, for example, are said to dwell in ancient trees. Celebi fits that tradition perfectly, but with a cosmic twist. It is not bound to one tree or one forest. It is bound to the entire timeline of nature. The shrine in Ilex Forest is merely a point of convergence, a place where the ripple of Celebi's presence can be felt most strongly, and people have known this for generations. They leave berries, they whisper wishes, they hope that maybe, just maybe, on a certain morning when the light filters through the leaves just so, Celebi will appear, and sometimes it does. In the lore of the Pokémon world, there are accounts of travelers who have seen Celebi, only for it to vanish into a shimmer of green light. Those who witness it often report a strange feeling, a sense that they have seen something not just rare, but out of place in time, as if the forest itself had allowed them a glimpse of a moment that belonged to another era entirely. This is the true essence of Celebi's existence across multiple eras simultaneously. It is not a being that hops from one timeline to another, like a stone skipping across water. It exists in all times at once. Imagine a note held on a violin string, vibrating endlessly. The sound does not move forward or backward. It simply is, present in every point of the room at the same time. Celebi is that vibration, but across the entire melody of history. It is present in the moment the first seed was planted, and it is present in the moment the last leaf falls. Every forest that ever was and ever will be feels Celebi's touch, and so its guardianship of time's purity becomes clear. Celebi does not prevent time from flowing. It prevents time from being corrupted, because time, like nature, can be poisoned. A wound inflicted in one era can spread backward and forward like a sickness in the roots of a tree. When a catastrophe tears through a timeline, when a war, a disaster, or a misuse of power creates a scar that threatens the whole, Celebi is there, not to fight, but to heal, to guide the flow back to a healthy course. But there is a fragile quality to Celebi's work. It is not invincible. In fact, Celebi is surprisingly vulnerable. It can be captured, it can be harmed, it can even be corrupted. This is what makes it distinctly mythical. It is not a god of time, it is a guardian, a steward, a voice that whispers through the forest, reminding the world that every moment is connected, every leaf part of a greater whole. The reverence for Celebi, then, is not born from fear or awe, but from a quiet understanding. Those who build shrines, who leave offerings, who tell stories of its travels, they are not begging for power, they are thanking the forest for its patience. They are acknowledging that time is a gift, and that someone somewhere is always watching over it. And as the forest breathes as centuries pass, Celebi continues its silent journey. It does not announce itself. It does not seek fame. It simply moves through the layers of history, ensuring that the green world endures. In one era, it might guide a lost traveler to safety. In another, it might carry a tiny seed across an ocean. In yet another, it might simply rest in the branches of an ancient tree, listening to the sound of the wind. But the ripple that Celebi sends through time is not confined to forests. The sea too has its guardians, and there is one whose story is tied to the deepest, most mysterious waters of all. A prince of the waves whose legacy is far older than any shrine. But that is a tale for another moment. For now, let the leaves rustle, let the shrine stand quiet in the moonlight, and let Celebi's gentle presence remind you that time, like nature, is never truly gone. It is only waiting. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. And so we leave the ancient forests, where Celebi weaves its eternal vigil, drifting southward to warmer waters, to the equatorial currents that pulse with a different kind of life. Here, in the sun-drenched shallows and the deep blue trenches of the southern seas, a different myth unfolds, not of time or creation, but of empathy, of connection, and of a legacy carried on the tides. At the heart of this story is a tiny sea prince, a Pokémon so small and delicate that it could easily be overlooked. Yet its biology is one of the most remarkable in the known world. Manaphy. Unlike the great legendaries that shape continents or command the oceans, Manaphy's power is subtle. It drifts in the warm southern currents, its body adapted to a life spent floating among plankton and coral. Its skin is translucent, almost glass-like, and within its cells, a unique compound allows it to withstand the immense pressure of the deep, while also thriving in the sunlit surface waters. But the true marvel lies deeper. Manaphy shares a strange bond with its offspring, Phione, and here the biology becomes almost paradoxical. Phione are born from the same warm currents, yet they cannot evolve into Manaphy. They are separate, yet linked, a perpetual larval form that never reaches its parent's potential. Scientists have debated endlessly. Is Phione a failure of evolution, or a deliberate step in a cycle we do not fully understand? The prevailing theory suggests that Manaphy's life cycle is tied to a hidden place, a sanctuary where the young can develop under conditions that cannot be replicated elsewhere. That place is the Sea Temple Samia. Samia is not merely a structure of coral and stone. It is a living sanctuary, veiled from human eyes by a combination of powerful psychic fields and a phenomenon known as the heart swap. Legend says that Samia only reveals itself to those who are pure of intent, those who can synchronize their very heartbeat with the rhythm of the sea. The temple is often spoken of in hushed tones among ancient mariner cultures, a place where the boundary between Pokémon and human blurs. It is said that within its halls, Manaphy can perform the heart swap, a mysterious ability that allows it to share emotions, memories, and even life energy with a bonded partner. This is not mere telepathy. It is a true merging of spirits, a temporary dissolution of the self into another being. How this works biologically remains one of Pokémon science's greatest puzzles. When Manaphy uses Heart Swap, it does not simply communicate. It aligns its neural patterns with its partner, creating a feedback loop of pure empathy. In that moment, the human feels the ocean's currents as Manaphy feels them. The warmth of the sun on the surface, the cold pressure of the abyss, the distant song of whales. Meanwhile, Manaphy experiences human emotion, love, fear, joy. This bond is so profound that it has been said to heal wounds, calm storms, and even grant visions of the temple's location. But the temple itself remains elusive, shifting with the currents of time and memory. This is the core of the Sea Prince's legacy. Not power, but connection. Manaphy does not command the seas with brute force. It weaves a web of empathy that spans across species, a reminder that in the vast loneliness of the ocean, understanding is the greatest treasure. The Temple Samir is the physical manifestation of that understanding, a place that exists only for those who have truly listened. But the oceans hold other secrets, darker ones. As we turn our gaze from these warm, empathic currents, we begin to feel a chill. The moon rises over the water, and with it, shadows stir. In the next chapter, we explore a realm not of connection, but of isolation, where nightmares take form, and the new moon brings a loneliness that can devour the soul. The story of the mythical Pokémon is far from over. From the warm southern currents and the hidden temple of Samir, we now travel to a realm far more intimate and far more terrifying, the landscape of dreams. In the Sinnoh region, the veil between waking and sleeping is guarded by two beings whose existence is defined by an eternal conflict, not a battle of force, but a war of light against shadow, hope against despair. You have likely experienced a nightmare at some point in your life. That cold grip of fear that clings to you, even after you open your eyes. But have you ever wondered what it would be like if that terror had a source? A creature whose very nature was to inflict those visions, yet who never intended harm. This is the tragic truth of Darkrai, the pitch-black Pokémon. Darkrai is often described as the embodiment of nightmares, but that label is incomplete. It is not a demon that delights in suffering. It is a being of pure shadow, born from a void that exists at the edges of the dream world, a place known as the new moon. When it stirs, its presence leaks into the dreams of humans and Pokémon alike, twisting peaceful slumber into nightmarish visions, so vivid they can cause physical pain and even unconsciousness. In the folklore of Sinnoh, there is a story told in hushed tones. On nights when the moon is completely dark, Darkrai roams freely, and anyone who falls asleep within its reach will be trapped in a cycle of fear until dawn. But here is the crux of its tragedy. Darkrai does not choose to spread these nightmares. It is a solitary creature, misunderstood and shunned, wandering the dreamscape in search of something it cannot name, only to bring suffering wherever it goes. It is a monster that weeps in the dark, unable to stop the very thing that defines it. Opposing Darkrai is Cresselia, the lunar Pokémon, where Darkrai is the darkness of a new moon. Cresselia is the gentle light of a crescent moon, a being of pure psychic energy that radiates tranquility. In Sinnoh mythology, Cresselia is the only force capable of countering Darkrai's nightmares. It is said that if you hold a feather from Cresselia's wing, a lunar wing, the nightmares will dissolve, replaced by peaceful, restorative dreams. The duality between these two is not one of good versus evil in the conventional sense. Cresselia is not a hero, it is a natural opposite, a balance. Just as day follows night, the arc of the moon that sheds light must coexist with the one that hides in shadow. Yet for the people of Sinnoh, Cresselia is the bringer of hope, the only known remedy against the eternal shadow of the new moon. There are accounts of travellers who have encountered Darkrai and then sought out Cresselia, carrying a lunar wing as a charm to ward off the nightmares. But such wings are extraordinarily rare, shed only when Cresselia sleeps, and they must be found before their light fades. The lore of Darkrai and Cresselia teaches us something profound about the nature of fear and mercy. Darkrai's existence is a curse, not a choice. It is a creature that causes suffering without malice, and that is perhaps the most heartbreaking kind of monster. One that cannot help what it is. In the Pokémon world, there are tales of people who have tried to befriend Darkrai, only to find themselves plunged into endless nightmares. Yet those same tales hint at a deeper pity. If Darkrai could be freed from its own nature, what would it become? The answer is not recorded, but the duality remains. Cresselia brings the comfort, and Darkrai brings the shadow. Together, they maintain the cycle of sleep, the push and pull between peace and terror that every dreamer must navigate. As you drift closer to sleep tonight, think of the lunar wing, that slender feather glowing with pale light. Imagine it resting beside you, its warmth pushing back the cold of the new moon. For in the quiet hours, when your mind begins to wander, It is not the nightmares that define you. It is the gratitude you feel for the dawn that always follows. And that gratitude, like a bloom emerging from the darkness, is the subject of our next story. We left the dreamscape of Sinnoh with the quiet tragedy of Darkrai, a being whose very presence causes suffering it never intends. From that shadow, we turn now to a creature whose power is the opposite, a being whose existence brings cleansing, renewal, and a transformation triggered by the most human of emotions. This is the story of Shaymin, deep in the flower-strewn meadows of what would become the Sinnoh region. Long before human settlements ever encroached on its fields, there lived a small, hedgehog-like Pokémon. It was not born from cosmic creation, nor from ancient war. Shaymin emerged not from chaos, but from the gratitude of the land itself. In the myths of the old world, it is said that after the great forces of time and space were set in motion, after the primal clashes of Groudon and Kyogre, the planet required a quieter kind of healing. The atmosphere was thick with the residue of those cataclysms. The air was heavy, saturated with particulates and imbalance. Into this fragile moment Shaymin came forth. Its role was subtle but essential. Wherever Shaymin walked, it absorbed the pollutants from the air, drawing them into its own body and converting them into pure, life-giving energy. The toxic elements that choked the sky were transformed within its floral fur into clean oxygen. Imagine the scent of a meadow after a spring rain, but magnified across entire continents. This purification was not loud or violent. It was patient, gentle, persistent. Over centuries, as Shaymin roamed the open fields, the atmosphere slowly regained its equilibrium. The very breath of the world became the gift of this small, unassuming Pokémon. But the purification was only the beginning. For the land to truly thrive, it needed a signal, a reminder that life could bloom again. That signal came in the form of the Gracidea flower. The myth speaks of a time when the first Gracidea appeared not from seed, but from the gratitude of the people and the Pokémon who had witnessed the healing. When a heart is filled with thankfulness, the legend says, the Gracidea responds, and when the Gracidea blooms, something extraordinary happens to Shaymin. The transformation from land form to sky form is more than a physical change. It is the embodiment of seasonal renewal, the promise that winter's cold must give way to spring's warmth. In its land form, Shaymin is grounded, close to the earth, humble and continuous in its work. But when it inhales the scent of a Gracidea, its body lifts. The fur shifts from its dense protective coat to a flowing mane of white and green, like the first blades of grass pushing through thawing soil. It takes on the grace of a flying creature, a tiny antelope of the air, able to dash across the sky with a speed and joy that seems impossible for its tiny frame. This metamorphosis is not arbitrary. It is triggered by gratitude, the act of receiving thanks, whether from a trainer, from another Pokémon, or from the environment itself. Unlocks a hidden potential within Shaymin. The mythic world teaches us that emotion has a literal, physical power. In the same way that Dialga controls time and Palkia controls space, Shaymin controls the energy of gratitude. And this energy is enough to rewrite its own biology. The cycle repeats with the seasons. In regions where Shaymin is known, the blooming of the Gracidea is celebrated as a rite of passage. People travel from distant villages to witness the moment when a Shaymin, touched by the flower's essence, unfurls into its sky form and races across the horizon. It is a symbol that change is not painful, it is a gift. The purification of the atmosphere, the bloom of the Gracidea, and the transformation of Shaymin are all part of the same sacred rhythm, one that reminds us that healing and joy are intertwined. But Shaymin does not stay in its sky form forever. Just as the seasons turn, it eventually returns to its grounded state, settling back into the meadows to continue its quiet work. The metamorphosis is temporary, a celebration of gratitude rather than a permanent evolution. It is a reminder, even the most profound changes can be fleeting, and that the true power lies in the moment of thankfulness itself. From this gentle cycle of renewal, we look ahead to another mythical Pokémon whose power is tied to victory and hope. The next chapter will explore the Victini Victory, a creature whose very existence is a promise of triumph against all odds. But for now, let the image of Shaman racing across a field of Grassideer linger, a soft landing for the mind as it drifts toward rest. As the Grassideer flowers folded their petals once more, signalling the end of another bloom cycle, the world of Unova was stirring with a different kind of energy. Far from the purified skies of Sinnoh, a quiet harbour held a secret that would challenge the very notion of fate itself. The city of Castelia bustled with commerce and life, its towering skyline a monument to human ambition. But just offshore, hidden in plain sight, an island sat cradled by the currents, the Liberty Garden. Most who sailed past it saw only its manicured hedges and pristine gardens, a lonely retreat for the city's elite. But deep beneath those hedges, in the heart of the island, something pulsed with a warmth that could shift the balance of any conflict. This island was not built for picnics or quiet reflection. It was a prison, or perhaps a temple. The exact purpose of the Liberty Garden remains ambiguous, but one fact is certain. It was designed to house a creature of impossible potential, the Pokémon known as Victini, small rabbit-like, with ears that seemed to catch the wind and eyes that held a spark of eternal fire. Victini is said to possess an infinitely powerful energy, one that radiates victory from its very core. Its name alone evokes the word victory, and this is no coincidence. In the lore of Unova, Victini is the Pokémon that brings guaranteed success. Not luck, not probability, not even skill, success itself. To have Victini on your side is to have the outcome of any struggle predetermined in your favour. The discovery of the Liberty Garden and the Pokémon that brings guaranteed success was not a clean archaeological find. It was a rumour whispered among sailors, a legend that eventually reached the ears of a young trainer. The story goes that this trainer, guided by a mysterious letter, uncovered the hidden entrance to the garden's inner sanctum. There, beneath the statues and the trimmed hedges, they found Victini waiting, not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. And when the trainer touched the creature, they felt a surge of certainty, a weightless assurance that, whatever they chose to do next, they would not fail. It is a seductive promise, and one that Unova's ancient past knew all too well. The energy signature of Victini, and its influence on the history of Unova's conflicts, is a thread woven through the region's most turbulent eras. Long before the modern leagues, before the great cities rose from the rivers, Unova was a land divided. Two brothers, two ideals, one dragon. The war that split the region was not just about truth versus ideals. It was about the raw, primal need to win. Historical fragments suggest that both sides sought Victini, hoping to tip the scales of the endless struggle. There are records of battles fought beneath the shadow of the Liberty Garden's original temple, of armies that marched with Victini's image painted on their shields. But the creature itself remained elusive, its power too great for any single faction to harness for long. The war eventually ended with the two brothers sealing their dragon, but the legacy of that conflict, the hunger for guaranteed victory, never truly faded. And here we arrive at the heart of the matter, the ethical dilemma of a creature that can manipulate the outcome of any struggle. To possess Victini is to possess a kind of omniscience over fate. But what does that mean for the meaning of the struggle itself? In a world where success is guaranteed, is there any growth, any courage, any lesson learned from failure? The trainers who have encountered Victini speak of a profound peace, but also a subtle unease. If you know you will win, why fight at all? The creature's power is not malevolent. It does not force victory upon others, nor does it steal success from opponents. It simply radiates the essence of winning, like a sun that shines only on one side of the field. Those who spend too long in its presence find the question and the value of their own choices. Victini does not care about fairness. It does not judge the worthiness of the combatants. It only gives victory to those it chooses to accompany, and that choice is as arbitrary as a fallen leaf. The island itself became a symbol of this dilemma, For generations, the Liberty Garden was sealed, its gates locked not to imprison Victini, but to protect the outside world from the temptation it represented. The letter that revealed its location was likely a test, a way to see if the chosen trainer would understand the weight of what they had found. Perhaps the true victory was not in claiming Victini's power, but in walking away from it. We may never know what happened to that first trainer, or whether they kept the creature's friendship or released it back into the island's sanctuary. What we do know is that Victini remains there still, tiny sun in a cage of hedges, its infinite energy waiting for someone to ask the wrong question. And yet, not all legends speak of victory through power. Some speak of a different kind of justice, one carried by a sword that never strikes in anger. That story waits just ahead, in the mountains of Unova, where a blade and a shield guard a forgotten oath. Victini's energy had once tilted the scales of Unova's wars, a promise of victory that shaped kingdoms. But victory, in the end, is fleeting. What lasts is the discipline that comes after, the forging of a protector, not a conqueror. And in the same region, whispers of a different kind of legend began to stir. Not the legend of a force that guarantees triumph, but of a young warrior who sought to earn his place among the immortals. His name was Keldeo, and he was the youngest of a lineage that stretched back into Unova's deepest folklore. The tale spoke of 4 great Pokémon, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and the one they called the Sword of Justice. But there was a 5th, a cult-like creature of water and heart, who was not yet counted among them. Keldeo was the apprentice, the aspirant, the one who had yet to prove his worth. And his story begins not in a castle or a battlefield, but in a place of quiet endurance, the Moor of Isiris. If you have ever stood in the northern reaches of Unova, where the cold air carries the scent of damp earth, and the sky is a perpetual grey-white, you might understand the mood of that moor. It is a place of mist and stillness, where the only movement comes from the wind bending the tall grass. It was here that Cobalion, the leader of the musketeer trio, chose to train the young Keldeo. The Moor of Isiris was not a battlefield, it was a meditation ground, a crucible of patience. Imagine the scene in the early hours before dawn. The moor is blanketed in a low fog that clings to the ground like a second skin. Cobalion stands motionless, his steel-horned head turned toward the horizon. Beside him, Keldeo shifts nervously, his mane flickering with the restlessness of youth. This is not a training ground for brute force. It is a school for the art of the sword. The sword in question is not metal. It is a technique, a manifestation of the soul called the secret sword. The musketeer trio had each mastered their own version of this ancient art. Cobalion's blade was justice, Terrakion's was courage, Virizion's was grace. Keldeo's task was to find his own, but the path to that secret was not marked by stone or signpost. It was buried in silence and repetition, in the 1,000 small movements that build the memory of muscle and spirit. Day after day, Keldeo practiced the forms shown to him. He ran the length of the moor until his hooves ached. He balanced on the tips of stones, his breath misting in the cold air. He fought shadows, his own reflection in the still puddles left by the morning rain. But the secret sword remained elusive. It was not a technique that could be taught. It had to be understood. And understanding for Keldeo came not from triumph but from failure. He fell again and again in the mud. He lost his footing, his focus, his temper. Each time Cobalion watched in silence. Virizion would sometimes come, her green mane flowing like willow leaves, and she would offer not words but presence. Terrakion would carve a pattern into the earth with his hooves, a map of a path that only Keldeo could walk. They were testing something deeper than skill. They were testing whether he had the heart to bear the title of a sword of justice. The journey to join their ranks was never about defeating an opponent. It was about surrendering the need to win. To become a protector, Keldeo had to let go of the pride that came with being young and eager. He had to learn that justice is not a weapon. It is a shield that exists for others, not for oneself. Weeks turned into months. The moor changed with the seasons, from the damp chill of autumn to the hard frost of winter. Keldeo's body grew stronger, but his spirit was still uncertain. Then one evening, when the sky was the colour of bruised plums, something shifted. He was standing alone at the edge of the moor, the wind cutting through his mane. The faint reflection of the stars stared back at him from a pool of water, and in that stillness, the secret sword revealed itself, not as a move, but as a truth, that the sword is not the blade, but the intention behind it. He raised his hoof, and a luminous edge of pure energy formed at his side. It was not sharp to the touch, but it hummed with the weight of purpose. He had found it. The secret sword was not meant to cut enemies. It was meant to cut through injustice. When he returned to the musketeer trio, they did not congratulate him. They simply stood aside, and Cobalion nodded once. Keldeo was no longer an apprentice. He was now one of them, a mythical protector, a sword of justice. But his story did not end there. It was only the beginning of a deeper mission. To find those who needed justice, and to stand for them, even when no one else would. Keldeo represents the transition from youth to guardianship, from the desire for glory to the quiet duty of protection. In a world of cosmic creation and ancient wars, he is the reminder that every legend must be earned through sacrifice, and his training at the Moor of Isirus is a testament that the most powerful weapons are not the ones we wield, but the ones we become. As the mist settled over Unova once more, another song began to echo from a distant shore, a melody that had been sung for centuries, whispered by the waves and carried on the wind. It was a tale of a voice that could pierce the heart, of a Pokémon whose song held the power of creation and destruction, a story that would soon call to all who listened. That story is known as the Song of the Muse. Keldeo's tale ends with a young Pokémon finding its place among legendary warriors, a story of discipline and the will to protect. But there is another kind of power, one that does not rely on the clash of blades or the roar of battle. It flows through melody, through rhythm, through the invisible threads that connect emotion to sound. This is the domain of Meloetta, a mythical Pokémon whose very existence is woven into the fabric of art and music across the ancient and modern worlds. In the lore of the Unova region, Meloetta is known as the Melody Pokémon, a being said to have sung the very first songs that ever echoed through the world. But those songs were not just entertainment. They were the seeds of culture, the raw material from which human creativity would bloom. Long before written language, before cities rose and fell, there was only sound. The wind in the leaves, the crash of waves, the calls of creatures, and then one voice rose above the rest, Meloetta's voice. Its song carried notes that seemed to resonate with the heart itself, teaching early humans how to express joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. This influence is not a relic of a distant past. It persists today, though most people never know the source. In the streets of Castelia City, in the concert halls of Nimbasa, in the quiet villages of the countryside, there are musicians who compose pieces that feel strangely familiar, melodies that seem to come from somewhere deeper than memory. Some say that when an artist is truly inspired, they are hearing an echo of Meloetta's original aria, a note passed down through generations, changing slightly with each retelling, but never losing its core essence. But Meloetta's gift to the world is not a single, permanent song. It is a living music, one that can shift the very form of the Pokémon who sings it. Meloetta possesses two distinct forms, aria form and pirouette form. In its aria form, it appears gentle and elegant, its voice soft and soothing, capable of calming even the most agitated heart. But when it sings a specific lost melody, something remarkable happens. The music changes tempo, the rhythm becomes faster, and Meloetta transforms into its pirouette form. In this state, it becomes a dancer, a performer of incredible speed and grace, its voice now sharp and percussive, driving combat as if it were a choreographed performance. The lost melody that triggers this transformation is a source of great mystery. It is not written in any library, not preserved in any ancient text. It is a tune that exists only in the memory of Meloetta itself, and perhaps in the faint echoes that still linger in certain hidden places. Some researchers believe that this melody was once known to an ancient civilization, a culture that revered Meloetta as a muse. They built temples where music was the only language, where the air was always filled with the sound of flutes and harps, and from those temples, they learned the secret of the transformation. But that civilization vanished, leaving behind only ruins and the haunting suspicion that the melody was taken with them into oblivion. What is known is that Meloetta's role as a muse extends far beyond its own form. The very concept of a muse, a source of creative inspiration, finds its embodiment in Pokémon like Meloetta. Mythical Pokémon, by their nature, are rare and often hidden, but their cultural impact on human creativity is immense. Consider the artists who paint landscapes of mythical forests, the composers who write symphonies about legendary battles, the poets who craft verses about celestial beings. They are channeling something that transcends ordinary experience. They are trying to capture the essence of encounters that are almost always second-hand, told through stories passed down by ancestors. That is the power of Meloetta. It does not need to be seen to inspire. The mere knowledge that a Pokémon exists that can sing the entire history of emotion into a single note is enough to push a painter to try a new brushstroke, or a dancer to attempt a difficult leap. The cultural impact of mythical Pokémon on human creativity is not a matter of direct influence, it is more profound. It is the idea that there is something more to the world, something beautiful and mysterious, waiting to be discovered. And that discovery can happen in a melody, in a poem, in a movement. Meloetta's lost melody is a reminder that some gifts are meant to be elusive. The search for it becomes a story in itself, a narrative that inspires more art than the melody ever could. And perhaps that is the true meaning of the muse. Not to give the answer, but to make the question irresistible. As the night deepens and the world quiets, there is another story waiting to be told. A story of an ancient insect revived, of a weapon from a forgotten war, of a protocol that should never have been written. That is the tale of the Genesect Protocol. For now, let the final notes of Meloetta's song fade into silence, and let your mind drift with the melody of what was, and what might still be. On the final note of Meloetta's song, as the ancient melody faded into the silence of a forgotten age, another story was already being written, not in the strings of a harp or the cadence of a dancer's feet, but in the cold hum of machinery and the fossilized echoes of an ancient predator. For every myth born from light, emotion, and celebration, there is a darker counterpart, one forged not by the natural world's grace, but by humanity's relentless ambition. In the Unova region, years after the heroes of truth and ideals clashed, a team emerged who believed they could rewrite the very fabric of life itself. They called themselves Team Plasma, but their philosophy had fractured. What remained was a splinter group obsessed with power, dominion, and the boundaries of science. They sought not to liberate Pokémon, but to command them, and their greatest project lay buried deep within the oldest rocks on Earth, deep beneath the surface of the region, in a place where the pressure of millennia compressed stone into near diamond. A fossil was uncovered. It was not like the ancient shells or ferns found in the desert resort. This was something far older, a specimen estimated to be 300 million years old, predating most known Pokémon life. Its skeleton was that of an arthropod, massive and insectoid, with limbs built for grasping and a body shaped for speed. The fossil was complete, preserved in a mineralized tomb that had shielded it from the ravages of time. But Team Plasma's scientists did not want to simply study it. They wanted to bring it back. And they had the technology to do not just a simple revival, as modern labs could do with a claw fossil or a plume fossil. They wanted to enhance it, to perfect it, to turn an ancient hunter into a weapon that had never existed before in nature. The process was not resurrection in the traditional sense. No, it was more like reconstruction, augmentation, integration. The fossil was scanned down to the molecular level, its genetic code mapped, and then rewritten. But instead of incubating the creature in a controlled environment, they built around it. They designed a chassis of metal and carbon fiber, a cannon mounted directly onto its back, and a targeting system that could lock onto threats with inhuman precision. The result was a being that had never walked the earth in any age. It was given a name that echoed through the laboratories like a mantra: Genesect. Now you must understand the weight of that name. In the natural world, an apex predator evolves over eons, its instincts honed by countless generations of hunting and survival. Its aggression is paired with caution, its ferocity with a deep, ancient understanding of balance. But Genesect was not given that time. It was awakened inside a shell of steel and circuits, its mind flooded with commands rather than memories. It remembered nothing of the ancient swamps or the primordial forests where its ancestors once ruled. All it had was instinct, raw, primal and unyielding, conflicting with the digital leash that bound its every movement. That conflict, that friction between the organic and the engineered, was the heart of the Genesect Protocol. When the creature was first powered on, the reports describe a moment of stillness. The mechanical carapace hummed with energy, the cannon on its back glowing a soft red. Then its eyes opened, or rather the lenses that replaced its eyes. For a split second, there was a flicker of something ancient, something that recognized the world was not as it had left it. And then the programming kicked in. The cannon fired. A test target was vaporized. The team cheered, but the creature stood motionless, its antennae twitching, as if listening for a call that would never come. What makes Genesect such a haunting figure in the pantheon of mythical Pokémon is not its power alone, but the tragedy of its existence. It is the ultimate predator, yes. Its speed rivals that of many legendary Pokémon. Its cannon can fire a projectile of pure energy that can shear through steel. It can learn the move Technoblast, a technique that adapts its type based on the drive inserted into the cannon: electric, fire, water, ice, making it unpredictable and versatile. But all of these enhancements were designed for one purpose: combat. The creature knows nothing else. It experiences no joy, no curiosity, no bond. It is a tool, a living weapon, and the only voice it hears is the cold instruction of its masters. And yet, even in the depths of its conditioning, something remains. In the wild, Genesect has been observed to act in ways that cannot be programmed. It sometimes pauses before an attack, as if deciding. It has been seen circling a target, not to intimidate but to observe. Scientists theorize that the ancient instincts are still there, buried beneath layers of circuitry. The creature was once a hunter that relied on stealth, patience and strategy. The modern augmentation may have given it raw firepower, but it could not erase 300 million years of evolution. The conflict between ancient instinct and modern technological enslavement is not a passive one. It is a war for every moment within the neural pathways of Genesect. It may not know what it is missing, but its body remembers. Team Plasma's resurrection of this 300 million year old apex predator was a triumph of science, but it was also a failure of morality. They viewed Genesect as a weapon to be wielded, not a life to be respected, and in doing so, they created a being that was neither fully natural nor fully artificial. It exists in a liminal space, a ghost in the machine, caught between the primordial past and a future that sees no place for it beyond the battlefield. The Pokémon world has many artificial creations, Mewtwo, Porygon, Magearna, but each of those was built with purpose, even compassion in some cases. Genesect was built without a soul, a hunter without a quarry, a king without a kingdom. The story of Genesect does not end in the laboratory. It was released into the world, perhaps by accident, perhaps by design, and it now roams remote areas of Unova and beyond. A silent predator that remembers nothing but the chase. Those who have encountered it speak of a chilling moment when it locks eyes with you, and you realize there is no malice in its stare, only function. It does not hate you. It does not even know you. It simply reacts. But here is the strangest truth. There are whispers among researchers that Genesect is not alone, that the fossil found was only one of many, that somewhere, In a vault sealed by order of the Pokémon League, a second chassis waits, empty, still connected to a dormant cannon, and the question lingers. Will anyone ever finish what Team Plasma started, or will the protocol remain incomplete? A warning carved into the amber of history. As we move toward the next chapter, consider the irony of this creature, encased in metal and forced to serve, while another being exists that is pure, untouchable, and crystalline. Where Genesect is a weapon forged from the past, there is a domain that embodies the future, a realm of shimmering light and unbreakable form. It is a place where the very concept of hardiness is personified, a fortress of diamond will. The story of that domain, a tale of endurance, of a guardian that has stood since the dawn of the world, of a Pokémon that cannot be wounded by time itself, is waiting for you in Chapter 18, the Diamond Domain. The previous chapter ended with the Genesect Protocol, a chilling reminder that even death cannot erase a predator's legacy. Team Plasma dragged a 300-million-year-old nightmare back into the light, strapped it with cybernetics, and aimed it at the heart of Unova. But deep beneath the surface of another region, far from the cold laboratories of modern science, a different kind of miracle was unfolding. One, born not from resurrection, but from rarity. The diamonds of the earth have always held a special place in human mythology. But the underground kingdoms of the Pokémon world are not made of stone and mineral alone. They are built upon a hierarchy as ancient as the gems themselves, and at its pinnacle sits a single being who commands the power of crystallized life. This is the story of the Diamond Domain. The creatures known as Carbink are common enough in certain subterranean caverns. Small, jewel-like Pokémon that form naturally from high-pressure environments deep within the planet's crust. They are content to dwell in colonies, their bodies composed of compressed carbon that sparkles faintly in the dark. But occasionally, once in an age, a Carbink is born with something more, a mutation so rare and so profound that it changes everything. That Carbink becomes a Diancie. Diancie is not merely an evolved form. It is a sudden, radical transformation that occurs in only one Carbink per generation, when the conditions are right, when the pressure, the heat, and the concentration of rare minerals align in a perfect confluence. A Carbink's core undergoes a cataclysmic change. Its body reshapes, its power multiplies, and it gains the ability to create diamonds from nothing. This is the Heart Diamond, a gem of such purity and strength that it becomes both the symbol and the source of the ruler's authority. The Heart Diamond is not just a crown jewel. It is a living fragment of the Earth's deepest energy. Diancie can produce diamonds at will, shaping them into weapons, shields, and even entire structures. But the Heart Diamond itself is something else entirely. A diamond so perfect that it can be used to restore life to a dying kingdom or unleash devastation upon its enemies. And that kingdom is the Diamond Domain, a subterranean realm ruled by a strict royal hierarchy. At the top sits the Diancie, the princess or queen of the kingdom. Below her are the Carbink nobility, the elder guardians who advise and protect. Then come the countless Carbink workers and soldiers, each one loyal to the throne. This hierarchy is not born of conquest, it is born of necessity. The underground world is fragile, and only a Diancie can maintain the stability required for life to flourish in the crushing depths. But stability is never permanent. The ancient records of the Diamond Domain speak of a recurring catastrophe known as the Great Destruction. It is a periodic event, perhaps once every few thousand years, when the tectonic forces of the planet shift dramatically, causing caverns to collapse, pressure to spike, and the very foundations of the kingdom to tremble. Without a Diancie to command the earth, to reshape the tunnels, and to create new diamonds to reinforce the walls, the entire civilization would be crushed into dust. The Great Destruction is not a myth, it is a cycle, and every Diancie lives with the knowledge that she is the only thing standing between her people and annihilation. This burden is immense, and it is made more complex by the fact that Diancie is unique among all mythical Pokémon in one crucial way. She can undergo mega evolution, No other mythical Pokémon has the ability to Mega Evolve. Not Mew, not Celebi, not Jirachi. Only Diancie can access that heightened state, and only with the aid of a special keystone and a Diancite. When she Mega Evolves, her form changes dramatically. She becomes larger, more regal, and her diamond-creating power becomes nearly limitless. In that state, she is capable of reshaping entire cavern systems, of halting the Great Destruction single-handedly, of becoming a living goddess of the deep earth. But Mega Evolution comes at a cost. The energy required is immense, and the strain on her body is profound. A Diancie who uses this power too frequently risks damaging her own core, perhaps even shattering her heart diamond, so she must choose her battles carefully. The tale of the Diamond Domain is one of isolation, duty, and the weight of a crown made of purest carbon. It is a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the Pokémon world, there are kingdoms that have never seen sunlight, ruled by queens who have never known peace. But beyond the kingdom's borders, far from the silent caverns and the glimmer of diamonds, another ancient power stirs, a being whose very nature defies the boundaries of space and reality, bound by rings that can open doors to anywhere or anything. The story of that power is yet to be told, but it waits in the shadows, coiled and patient, ready to unbound itself from 1,000 years of imprisonment. That story begins with the Hoopa Unbound. As the heart diamond gleamed in the depths of the underground kingdom, Diancie secured its throne, and the Great Destruction was averted. But elsewhere in the world, another power stirred, older perhaps than any Carbink mutation, and far more dangerous. It did not emerge from the earth like a crystal. It coiled through the fabric of space itself, waiting for the moment when a human hand would reach for a bottle that was never meant to be opened. In the hot coastal city of Dahara, a legend had been passed down for generations. The people spoke of a Djinn Pokémon, a being so ancient and so powerful that it could create ring-like portals through the air, tears in reality that led to anywhere and anywhen. This was Hoopa, though the name itself was a warning, for Hoopa came in two forms: a smaller, mischievous creature that could be contained, and a massive, wrathful entity known as Hoopa Unbound, whose power was not a gift but a calamity. The difference between them was a single artifact: the prison bottle. The prison bottle was not a weapon, it was a cage, a vessel carved from materials that no modern scientist has ever identified, inscribed with symbols that predate every known alphabet. It was designed to hold the majority of Hoopa's strength, to keep the Djinn Pokémon bound and docile. Without the bottle, Hoopa Unbound would rise, and when it rose, it did not fight with claws or fire. It fought with the very architecture of reality. The terrifying power of the Djinn Pokémon to warp space and summon legendaries is what made Hoopa Unbound a threat unlike any other. You see, those golden rings it conjured were not just doors, they were invitations, forced summons that could reach across continents and dimensions. Hoopa Unbound could call forth any legendary Pokémon it chose, not by negotiation, not by alliance, but by sheer will. Imagine the primal forces of land and sea, the guardians of time and space, the ancient deities of destruction and creation, all pulled into one location at the whim of a single angry Djinn. That was not a battle. That was the collapse of order. The sealing of Hoopa's true power within the prison bottle to protect the world was not a simple act of magic. It required sacrifice and vigilance. The bottle had to be kept hidden and untouched, because if it were ever broken, or if the seal were tampered with, the unleashed energy would not just free Hoopa, it would unmake every barrier that kept the legendaries in their rightful places. In Dahara, the guardians of the bottle passed their duty from parent to child for centuries, knowing that failure meant the end of their city, perhaps the end of much more. Then came the incident that no one had prepared for. A group of explorers, driven by curiosity and desire for ancient treasure, found the prison bottle. They did not understand what it truly was. To them, it was a relic to be studied, a prize to be claimed. When they attempted to open it, the seal broke. The chaos of the Dahara City incident and the danger of unchecked desire became instantly clear. Hoopa Unbound erupted from the fragments, its form swelling to a monstrous height, its 6 arms reaching out to tear holes in the sky. The city of Dahara became a stage for pandemonium. Legendary Pokémon began appearing one after another, pulled through golden rings against their will. Groudon and Kyogre roared in the same square. Dialga and Palkia clashed in the harbour. Rayquaza descended, not as a mediator, but as another piece thrown onto a burning board. The people of Dahara fled. The sky was a patchwork of portals, each one a gateway to somewhere else, somewhere dangerous. Hoopa Unbound laughed, not with cruelty, but with the glee of a child who had just discovered it could break every toy, and that was the true terror. It did not seek conquest or vengeance. It simply wanted to play, and its play was the unraveling of reality. The legendaries it summoned were not allies. They were pawns, confused and enraged, lashing out at everything around them. The city burned, not from fire, but from the friction of forces that should never meet. In the end, only a desperate gamble saved Dahara. A young guardian, one who had studied the legends all her life, managed to recover a shard of the prison bottle. With the help of a loyal Pokémon, she tricked Hoopa Unbound into reaching for a ring that led back to the bottle's remains. When it touched the shard, the power of the seal reasserted itself, dragging the unbound form back into its smaller, contained shape. The rings closed. The legendaries returned to their domains. The city was left in rubble but alive. But the lesson of that day remains. Desire unchecked can crack the universe. The prison bottle was never destroyed. It was reforged, hidden again, watched over by new guardians, who understand that some powers are not meant to be understood or used. They are meant to be contained. And as the dust settled over Dahara, far away in a cold industrial region, a different kind of power was being harnessed, not from ancient bottles or gin, but from steam and steel and the will to rule. The next chapter in this history would not be about sealing. It would be about forging, and its name would be the Steam King. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The previous chapter ended with Hoopa Unbound, a force so chaotic that it had to be sealed away by a simple vessel of glass and magic. But not every mythical is a creature of raw power or cosmic destruction. Some are built from the ground up, forged by the hands of ancient engineers, given a purpose that would outlast the kingdoms they were made to protect. And then there are those who are simply isolated, unwilling to interact with a world that has hurt the very beings they care for. This is the story of the Steam King. Volcanion is a paradox wrapped in iron and mist. It is the only Pokémon with a dual typing of fire and water, a combination that seems to defy the laws of nature itself. But this is no accident of evolution or genetic drift. Volcanion's body is a living engine, a fusion of organic tissue and mechanical precision that allows it to superheat water within its own internal chambers, releasing steam at pressures that can level mountains. Its back is lined with what appear to be turrets or exhaust pipes, constantly venting plumes of vapor, and its hooves, massive and metallic, are built to withstand the searing temperatures that would melt lesser creatures. This is a Pokémon that does not just control steam, it is steam, in the most literal sense possible. And yet for all its power Volcanion hides. It dwells within the Nebel Plateau, a remote and treacherous region of barren rock and thin air, far from human settlements. The plateau is often shrouded in mist, and stories say that anyone who ventures too close will hear the hiss of escaping gas, the rumble of a subterranean furnace. The locals call it the home of the Steam King, and they know better than to disturb it. But why would such a formidable being choose solitude over dominion? The answer lies in its history as a guardian. Volcanion does not seek to rule, it seeks to heal. The Nebel Plateau is more than just a hiding place. It is a sanctuary. Within its rocky crevices and hidden caves, Volcanion shelters Pokémon that have been injured by humans, those caught in industrial accidents, burned by factory fires, poisoned by chemical runoff. These are the creatures the Steam King takes in. It uses its own steam to cleanse wounds, to restore lost mobility, to provide a warmth that is not chemical but compassionate. The science of steam pressure becomes a tool of mercy. At low pressures, steam is a gentle vapor that can soothe burns and open blocked airways. At higher pressures, it becomes a scalding deterrent, a last line of defense. Volcanion has learned to calibrate this power with the precision of a surgeon and the warmth of a caretaker. But even the most powerful guardians cannot work miracles alone. And that is where the bond with Majana begins. Majana is not a natural Pokémon. It is an artificial life form created centuries ago in the Alola region by a brilliant inventor. Its body is a clockwork marvel, powered by a device called the Soul Heart, which can absorb the life energy of other Pokémon to generate its own vitality. But what many do not know is that Majana was not designed to be a weapon. It was designed to protect a princess, to serve as a loyal companion, and in that role, it found a kindred spirit in Volcanion. The connection between them is not emotional in the way humans understand it. It is mechanical. Volcanion's steam can be channeled into Majana's internal mechanisms, boosting its energy reserves and allowing the artificial Pokémon to operate for years without needing to draw on the life force of others. In return, Majana's Soul Heart can stabilize Volcanion's volatile inner pressure, preventing catastrophic explosions. They are two halves of a single system, a partnership forged in fire and gears. When they are together, the Nebel Plateau feels less like a prison and more like a workshop, and yet Volcanion remains wary. The world beyond the plateau is full of machines that exploit, of humans who see only power and profit. The Steam King has seen too many wounded Pokémon dragged away by poachers, too many forests burned for fuel, too many rivers choked with waste. It cannot trust a species that so often hurts the innocent. So it waits, it watches, it tends to its charges in the mist, a silent king ruling over a kingdom of broken bodies and mended souls. But even the most patient guardian cannot ignore the call of fate forever. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, another artificial heart is beating, a project that will change everything we know about life, death, and the soul itself. That story belongs to the Soul Heart Project. Chapter 21. The Soul Heart Project. From the solitude of the Nebel Plateau, where Volcanion guarded its secrets in steam and stone, we turn now to a creation born not of natural evolution or ancient myth, but of deliberate human hands. 500 years ago, in a kingdom that once flourished in the region now known as Alola, a genius scientist, a master of both ancient alchemy and emerging mechanics, accepted a commission that would blur the line between life and machine. The princess of that kingdom was beloved but frail, and her days were numbered by a malady no medicine could cure. The scientist, driven by loyalty and perhaps by the audacity of his own brilliance, set out to build her a guardian that would never tire, never age, and never leave her side. What he crafted was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Majana, for that was her name, was a fully mechanical Pokémon, a seamless fusion of gears, alloys, and something far more mysterious. Her body was a marvel of precision engineering, but her heart, the Soul Heart, was where the true miracle resided. The scientist had discovered a way to harness the life force of Pokémon, channeling it into a crystalline core that pulsed with a faint, rose-coloured glow. This was no ordinary power source. It was a soul, bound to metal and circuitry, and with it, Majana could think, feel, and protect the princess with a devotion that rivaled any living creature. But the tragedy of the Soul Heart was that it demanded a price. To create it, the scientist had to draw upon the energy of countless other Pokémon, each one surrendering a fragment of its vitality. The process was not violent, the donors survived, but it left an indelible mark on the artifact. Majana's heart was a symphony of borrowed life, and every beat remembered the source. When the princess finally passed, decades later, Majana did not shut down. Instead, she remained by her side, powered by grief and purpose, until the kingdom itself crumbled into legend. She was the first of her kind, a fully mechanical mythical, and her story would echo across the centuries. In Morgana, the bridge between eras, her construction echoes the ancient alchemists who sought to infuse metal with spirit. Yet her gears and pistons foretell the robotics of the modern world. She is a living relic, a testimony to a time when science and mysticism were not yet divided. And as we consider her long slumber in the ruins of that forgotten castle, we cannot help but wonder what other shadows from the past are stirring. The next chapter of our journey will take us to a field where a war once raged, and where the suffering of that conflict gave rise to something that walks between the light and the dark. But that is a story for another night. 500 years ago, a kingdom in Alola witnessed something miraculous and something tragic intertwined. A brilliant scientist, driven by love for a dying princess, poured his genius into metal and magic, creating a soul within a machine. That soul, the soul heart, pulsed with life, and the princess was saved, but at a cost that echoes through the ages. Morgana, the artificial mythical, became a symbol of devotion and of the delicate line between creation and hubris. But that story, as profound as it is but a whisper in the long corridor of history. For there are older shadows cast not by a single kingdom, but by a war that consumed an entire continent. To understand those shadows, we must travel back in time, far beyond the age of steam and kingdoms, to a period known to few, yet carved into the very land of Kalos. The year is not recorded in human calendars, but in the memory of the earth and the legends of the Pokémon that witnessed it. 3,000 years before the Common Era, the region of Kalos was not the land of beauty and elegance we know today. It was a crucible of fire and iron, a slaughterhouse of steel and blood. A great war raged, a conflict so terrible that its scars remain in the soil, in the architecture of the ancient ruins, and in the collective unconscious of the Pokémon world. This was the Kalos War of 3000 BC, a clash of kingdoms, of armies, and of powers that should have remained dormant. In the midst of this chaos, unseen and unheard, a presence lingered. It did not fight. It did not take sides. It did not intervene. It watched. From the flickering corners of torchlight, from the deep crevices between collapsing walls, from the very shadows cast by the dying, this presence observed. This was Marshadow, the Gloom Dweller Pokémon, a creature of pure shadow and plasma, born from the darkness that clings to every living thing. Its existence is inseparable from the shadows, and in a time of war, shadows are long and plentiful. Marshadow's presence in the shadows of the Kalos War of 3000 BC was not a coincidence, it was a purpose. It was drawn there, not by the violence itself, but by the intensity of the desires that fueled the conflict. You see, Marshadow is not a creature of malice. It is not a demon of war. It is, in the oldest traditions, known as the Zenith. This is a title of profound weight. The Zenith is the highest point, the apex, the moment of greatest power. But for Marshadow, the Zenith is not a place of victory. It is a moment of observation. It is the moment when a being's strength reaches its peak, when every ounce of will, every flicker of determination, every drop of power is gathered for a single monumental purpose. Marshadow exists to witness that moment. It hides in the shadows, not to attack, but to watch, to learn, to record the true nature of a combatant's power. And it does not merely watch. Marshadow possesses a terrifying ability that sets it apart from almost any other Pokémon. It can mimic the movements and power of its opponents. This is not mere imitation, not a simple copy. It is a deep, resonant echo. Marshadow can step into the shadow of another being, and for a brief, devastating moment, become the mirror of that being's strength. It can replicate techniques, movements, even the raw force of a legendary's attack. In the heat of battle, when a warrior or a Pokémon unleashes their ultimate technique, their shadow trembles, and within that tremor, Marshadow is there, absorbing the very essence of the attack. It does not steal the power, it records it, and it can then use that recorded power as its own. This ability makes Marshadow one of the most unpredictable and dangerous opponents imaginable. but also one of the most passive observers. During the Kalos War, Marshadow's role as the Zenith was fulfilled countless times. It watched the soldiers, the knights, the kings, and the legendary Pokémon that were drawn into the conflict. It saw the rise of a terrible weapon, a device of ultimate destruction that would later reshape the region. It saw the sacrifice of a great Pokémon, the one that gave its life to seal that weapon away. In every shadow of that war, Marshadow was there, a silent chronicler of the zenith of human and Pokémon ambition. It is said that those who seek the Rainbow Wing, the feather of Ho-Oh that grants immense power and guidance, are watched by Marshadow as well. For to seek the Rainbow Wing is to seek a profound strength, a connection to the legendary forces of the world. And Marshadow, ever watchful, observes those who dare to reach for that height. It is not a test, but a record. It waits to see if the seeker is worthy of their own power, if they can wield it, without succumbing to the same darkness that consumed the war. The shadows of that ancient conflict have long since faded, but Marshadow has not. It remains a ghost in the light, a presence just out of sight. It does not age, it does not weaken. It simply waits, watching the shadows of every battle, every struggle, every moment of greatness. It is the shadow that reminds us that our greatest triumphs are also our most vulnerable moments. For in that instant of peak power, we are most visible to the darkness. And the darkness, in the form of Marshadow, is always there, not as a threat, but as a question. What will you do with the strength you gather? What will your shadow remember? And as we contemplate that question, the story does not end. The world of mythical Pokémon is vast, and new shadows, new lights, and new mysteries emerge from the depths of the natural world. From the shadow of war, we turn to a different kind of power, one born of pure electricity, of speed so blinding it leaves trails of light in the night, a being of lightning and instinct, a creature of the wild that has never been tamed by human hands. Its very existence challenges our understanding of what a mythical Pokémon can be, and its story is a jolt of pure energy in the quiet of this history. The Lightning of Zeraora awaits, a spark that will illuminate the darkest corners of the unknown. The shadow of the Kalos War settled into history, leaving behind only echoes. Legends of a great conflict that reshaped the land and the lives of those who survived it. And while Marshadow lingered in the corners of that story, observing strength from the darkness, there is another creature whose presence is felt not in the weight of memory, but in the crackle of sudden blinding light. This is the story of Zeraora, the thunderclap Pokémon, a being so fast it seems to exist between heartbeats, a lightning bolt given form and will. To understand Zeraora, you must first understand the tropical forests of Alola. These are not the gentle, sun-dappled woodlands of temperate regions. The jungles of Alola are dense, humid and alive with the constant hum of insect wings and the rustle of unseen creatures. Vines as thick as your arm drape from towering trees, and the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Light struggles to reach the forest floor, filtering down in scattered shafts that illuminate patches of moss and ferns. It is a world of perpetual twilight, where movement is often heard before it is seen. And it is here, in this green labyrinth, that Zeraora makes its home. But calling it a home is almost misleading. Zeraora is not a guardian of a specific territory, in the way that a Pokémon like Tapu Koko might claim a patch of land. Zeraora is a wanderer, a phantom of the forest. Its elusive nature is the very thing that defines it. Sightings are rare, and when they occur, they are often described as a flash of yellow fur, a sudden streak of electric blue, and then nothing. Locals speak of it in hushed tones, not as a legend, but as an almost mythical presence that they know exists but can never quite prove. It is the Thunderclap Pokémon, after all, a name that suggests an event so sudden and so powerful that it is over before you can even register its beginning. How does Zeraora achieve such unbelievable speed? The answer lies not in its muscles, but in the very fabric of the world around it. Zeraora possesses a unique ability to manipulate magnetic fields. Its body generates a powerful electromagnetic aura, and by subtly altering the polarity of this field in relation to the Earth's own magnetic lines, it can propel itself forward with almost no friction. Imagine a skater gliding on perfectly smooth ice, but with the ability to change direction instantly and accelerate to impossible speeds. That is Zeraora's reality. It does not run so much as it is pulled and pushed by invisible forces. Its limbs move, yes, but the real work is done by the silent, unseen dance of magnetic attraction and repulsion. This is not a learned skill. It is an innate biological function. The lightning bolt-shaped crest on Zeraora's head is not merely decorative. It is a highly sensitive organ that detects the faintest shifts in the magnetic field. When Zeraora prepares to move, its fur bristles and arcs of electricity leap between its body and the ground, charging the air with ozone. In that instant, it becomes a living electromagnet. The forest around it, full of iron-rich minerals, and the natural magnetic currents of the planet, becomes a map of potential trajectories. Zeraora does not calculate a path. It feels it, like a compass needle that knows true north. This magnetic mastery also explains Zeraora's connection to electricity, which is far more than a simple offensive tool. Lightning and magnetism are two sides of the same coin. When Zeraora moves, it generates a powerful electric charge. It can discharge this in a devastating plasma fist's attack, but it can also absorb ambient electricity from thunderstorms, feeding its own magnetic core. In the jungle, where storms are frequent and powerful, Zeraora is never without a source of power. It is a creature perfectly adapted to a world of constant electrical energy, a living lightning rod that chooses when to strike. Now you might wonder how such a being fits into the spiritual tapestry of Alola. The islands are known for their guardian deities. The four Tapu. Tapu Koko, the guardian of Melemele Island, is perhaps the most famous. It too is an electric type, and it too is associated with speed and lightning. But the comparison between Zeraora and the Tapu is a study in contrast. The Tapu are deeply tied to the land. Each has its own island, its own shrine, its own duty to protect the natural order and the people who live there. Tapu Koko is a deity with a defined role, a personality, and a history woven into the rituals and traditions of the Alolan people. It is worshipped and respected, even feared. Zeraora, on the other hand, is a force of nature, not a god. It has no shrine, no offerings left at its feet. It does not answer prayers or intervene in the affairs of humans or Pokémon. The Tapu Guardians represent a covenant between the land and its inhabitants. Zeraora represents pure, untamed wildness. It is the lightning that splits a tree and disappears, leaving only smoke and the scent of ozone. It does not explain itself. It does not need to. Its existence is its own justification. While the Tapu are the soul of Alola, Zeraora is the electricity that courses through its veins, invisible until it leaps to the surface, and then gone before you can catch your breath. And yet, for all its solitary nature, Zeraora is not entirely separate from the world. There is a strange, almost magnetic pull between it and the island's environment. Some researchers believe that Zeraora is drawn to places where the natural magnetic field is particularly strong or chaotic. Others speculate that it seeks out regions rich in metallic minerals, where it can recharge its internal stores with ease. But these theories are just that, theories. Zeraora does not stay long enough to be studied. It leaves only fleeting traces, a scorch mark on a tree trunk, a patch of flattened grass, the lingering tingle of static electricity in the air. To see Zeraora is to witness something that feels like it should not exist in the ordinary world. It is a creature of thresholds, of the moment between one heartbeat and the next. And as you listen to this, somewhere in the depths of an Alolan jungle, a streak of yellow and blue is racing through the underbrush, leaving no footprint, no echo, only the memory of light. It is the Lightning of Zeraora, and it will be gone before you ever truly knew it was there. But for all its speed and mystery, Zeraora is not the only mythical Pokémon whose origins are tied to Alola. There is another, far more peculiar creature that wanders these islands. A being made of liquid metal, small and curious, with a single eye and a hexagonal nut for a head. It is a creature that seems almost out of place in this lush world of life and electricity. Yet, its connection to the region is deeper than anyone could have guessed. That story, the story of the Meltan, is one we will explore in the next chapter. For now, let the image of that silent, metallic wanderer settle in your mind as you drift closer to sleep. The last story we explored took us deep into the tropical forests of Alola, where the thunderclap Pokémon Zeraora moved like living lightning across magnetic fields. But even as those storms of energy crackled through the canopy, something far stranger was beginning to stir in the hidden corners of the Pokémon world. Something small, something metallic, and something that would completely upend everything we thought we knew about mythical Pokémon. Because in the summer of 2018, a tiny creature emerged not through an ancient egg or a cosmic event, but through the lens of a smartphone screen and the augmented reality of Pokémon Go. Its name was Meltan, and it looked like nothing else in the Pokédex. A small six-sided nut of liquid metal with a single eye peering out from its center, and a tail that dripped and reformed like mercury. It was discovered by players in the wild, but not in the usual way. You had to use a special item, a mystery box, to lure it out. And then the Hexnut Pokémon would appear in clusters, its body shifting and flowing as it rolled across the ground. It was a phenomenon that baffled researchers at first, because Meltan did not seem to belong to any known evolutionary line. It was not related to Clink or Magnemite or any other steel type. Its body was described as liquid metal, and it could reshape itself at will, absorbing metal objects and incorporating them into its own form. This was the first time a Pokémon had been introduced exclusively through a mobile game, a partnership between Pokémon Go and the main series titles. And it was only the beginning, because when enough Meltan gathered together, something extraordinary happened. They could merge their liquid bodies, combining into a much larger and more powerful form, and that form was Melmetal. Melmetal is the only mythical Pokémon that can evolve. Think about that for a moment. Every other mythical, from Mew to Manaphy to Zeraora, exists in a single stage. They are unique, singular beings that do not change or grow beyond their initial form. But Melmetal is different. It evolves from Meltan when enough Meltan candy is collected. A process that in the lore reflects the slow accumulation of metal and the gradual fusion of many individual Meltan into one colossal being. And the result is a towering 7-foot-tall serpentine entity made of interlocking hexagonal plates with immense arms that end in heavy coiled fists. Its body is not just metal, it is a living factory, capable of generating vast amounts of pure refined metal from its own form. And this power was not lost on ancient civilizations. According to the historical records and the lore uncovered in the Sinnoh region and beyond, Melmetal was once worshipped by people long ago. They saw it as a divine source of metal, a creature that could produce the raw materials needed to build tools, weapons and structures. In a world before industrial smelting, a single Melmetal could provide an entire community with the iron and steel they needed to survive. Temples were raised in its honor, and offerings of scrap metal were left at altars in the hope that Melmetal would bless the village with its bounty. And yet, for all that reverence, Melmetal eventually faded from memory, becoming a legend whispered only in the oldest texts. Its worship was forgotten, and the Pokémon itself was believed to be extinct, until the day a tiny Hexnut appeared on a trainer's phone, and the mystery began to unravel once more. The liquid metal body of Meltan is key to understanding its ancient connection. It is not just a passive material, it is alive, constantly in motion, constantly absorbing and reshaping. When multiple Meltan gather, they confuse their bodies into a single hive mind, a collective intelligence that guides the fusion into the Melmetal form. This is why Melmetal is so rare in the modern era. The individual Meltan are scattered, and they rarely find enough of their own kind to trigger the evolution. But in the ancient world where Melmetal was worshipped, they must have clustered in great numbers near human settlements drawn by the metal tools and weapons that humans used, and the people, in turn, recognized the value of this living metal. They did not just worship Melmetal, they integrated it into their lives, perhaps even learning to shape the metal it produced into armor and artwork. The hexnut shape of Meltan is itself a clue. The six-sided pattern appears in many ancient designs, from honeycombs to sacred geometry. It suggests that the ancients understood the structure of Meltan's body, that they saw it as a symbol of order and creation, and Melmetal, in its evolved form, embodies that creation on a grand scale. Its body is said to produce metal at an astonishing rate, enough to build entire structures. In a way, Melmetal is a living forge, a creature that can transform the world around it. But the true significance of Melmetal's evolution goes beyond its ancient worship. It represents a fundamental shift in how we understand mythical Pokémon. For years, the category was defined by its static nature. Mythical Pokémon were unique events, given out at special occasions, never evolving. They were trophies of a sort, rare and unchanging. But Meltan and Melmetal broke that pattern. They showed that even the most mysterious and elusive Pokémon could have a life cycle, a growth process that tied them to the natural world. And they did it in a way that bridged two different games, two different realities. The discovery of Meltan in Pokémon Go was a community effort, a puzzle solved by thousands of players working together. It was a modern myth, created in real time by the very people who would later worship these creatures in the games. And that is fitting, because Melmetal was always meant to be a bridge between the digital and the physical, a creature of liquid metal that could flow from one container to another, from one world to the next. As we turn our gaze from the ancient temples that once honored Melmetal, we begin to hear a distant sound, a low rhythmic thrum, like a heartbeat deep in the earth. It comes from a jungle far from Alola, a place where the canopy is so thick that sunlight barely reaches the floor. And in that jungle, something is stirring. Something old, something powerful, and something that guards a secret buried in the heart of the green. That is the story we will follow next, into the silent depths where the jungle's heart beats alone. From the glistening liquid metal of Meltan and the ancient reverence for Melmetal, we now turn our gaze to a different kind of jungle. Not a jungle of metal, but one of living, breathing vines, where the canopy is so thick that sunlight barely touches the soil. And in this emerald labyrinth, something more elusive than any metal serpent dwells. A mythical Pokémon that exists at the very edge of human knowledge. A creature of instinct and isolation, yet capable of a bond that defies its own nature. This is the story of Zarude, the rogue monkey Pokémon, and the secret heart of the Dada Forest. Deep within the dense, untamed forests of a distant region, there lies a tribe, the Dada Forest tribe. They are not a tribe of humans, but of Zarude. These are not solitary beasts. They live in a complex social structure, a collective of powerful, dark-furred primates bound by a strict hierarchy. The troop is led by an alpha, the most dominant male or female, and every Zarude has a role. They are guardians of the forest, protectors of a sacred ecosystem that revolves around a very specific resource, the jungle vines. These vines are not ordinary creepers. They possess extraordinary healing properties. When woven into a paste or chewed, they can cure wounds, soothe sickness, and even restore vitality. The Zarude know the vines intimately. They understand which ones to harvest, when to pluck them, and how to use them to maintain the health of the forest itself. The vines are the tribe's greatest treasure, and the Zarude are their sworn stewards. But within this structured society, there is a clear code of conduct. Zarude are territorial, aggressive by nature. They are not gentle creatures. Their bodies are built for speed and power, their long arms ending in sharp claws, their tails like whips. They use these tools to drive away intruders, whether predator or human. The tribe's existence is one of constant vigilance, a cycle of defending the vines and maintaining order. They do not welcome outsiders. They do not adopt. They do not show mercy to those who threaten their home. This is the law of the Dada Forest. And yet nature has a way of breaking its own rules. The deviation of a single Zarude. Somewhere perhaps on the fringes of the tribe's territory, a young Zarude was born. Or perhaps it was an outcast, a rogue. This individual, for reasons unknown, did not follow the aggressive path of its kin. It did not feel the same instinct to drive away everything that was different. One day it encountered something unprecedented. A human child, abandoned, lost alone in the wild. The child was defenseless, weak, vulnerable. The Zarude's instinct should have been to attack, to drive it off, to protect the vines from a new threat, but it didn't. Instead, it hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, something shifted. The Zarude reached out. It picked up the child. It brought it into the forest, into its own den, raised it. It fed it. It taught it. It became its parent. This is the anomaly, the deviation that defies the very nature of the species. This is the story that scholars whisper about. A Zarude that chose compassion over aggression, that chose to nurture a human child as its own. The child grew, learning the ways of the forest, learning to climb, to swing, to understand the language of the vines. And the Zarude, in turn, learnt patience, gentleness, and a bond that transcended species. The Dada Forest tribe, upon discovering this, must have been shocked. But the rogue Zarude's act had consequences. It showed that even within a tribe bound by the law of the jungle, an individual can choose a different path. It becomes a living legend, a myth within the myth, a testament to the idea that even the most aggressive nature can be tempered by love. The healing properties of the jungle vines are deeply intertwined with this story. The Zarude knew which vines to use for the child's ailments. It would chew the leaves, mix the sap, and apply it to scrapes and bruises. The vines are not just a resource, they are a connection to the ecosystem itself. The Zarude's role as guardian of these vines is not arbitrary. Without the Zarude, the vines would be over-harvested or lost to invasive species. The Zarude tribe maintains the balance. They prune, they protect, they ensure that the vines thrive. In return, the vines sustain them. This is a symbiotic relationship, a dance between creature and plant, and it is tied directly to the mythical nature of Zarude. For a Zarude is not just a Pokémon, it is an embodiment of the forest's will, and when it raises a human child, it is as if the forest itself is adopting a new soul. The story of Zarude is not one of cosmic creation or ancient wars. It is a smaller story, a fable of the heart. It reminds us that even in the most structured, aggressive societies, there is room for deviation, for a single act of kindness that rewrites the rules. The jungle's heart beats through the vines, through the tribe, and through the rogue Zarude who chose to love a child. And as that child grew, what became of them? Did they return to human civilization, bearing the scars and wisdom of the forest? Or did they remain, bridge between two worlds, forever part of the Dada tribe? That perhaps is a story for another time. But the forest holds many secrets, and one of them, just beyond the horizon, involves a different kind of creation. Something not born of nature, but forged by human hands and divine ambition. Something that challenges the very idea of what it means to be a Pokémon, or a god. That story is waiting in the next chapter as we turn our attention to the artificial god. From the jungles of the Dada forest, where a Zarude chose compassion over instinct, we turn now to a very different kind of origin. A birth not in the heart of a wild tribe, but in the sterile humming chambers of a laboratory. This is the story of a being created not by nature, not by any ancient myth, but by the sheer relentless will of humanity. This is the story of Mewtwo. The pursuit of power is an old story. Throughout history, humans have sought to control fire, to harness lightning, to master the elements. But in the world of Pokémon, the ultimate expression of that ambition came not from capturing a wild force, but from manufacturing one. The scientists who dreamed of Mewtwo were not content with the legends of old. They wanted to craft perfection, and they believed they had the template. That template was Mew, the ancestral Pokémon said to contain the genetic code of every creature that ever existed. A living fossil, a whisper of creation itself. If Mew was the blueprint of life, then what could be built from that blueprint? What if you could take the DNA of a being that was already considered the ancestor of all Pokémon and improve it, amplify its power, remove its weaknesses, create a weapon that answered to no god, no legend, only to the men who designed it? And so, within the hidden laboratories of the Cinnabar Island mansion, or in some versions of the story, beneath a remote island far from prying eyes, the project began. The scientists spliced genes, accelerated growth, and infused their creation with a psychic potential that rivaled the natural forces of the world. They called it Mewtwo, and when it first opened its eyes, it did not see a mother, or a forest, or the stars. It saw only the cold light of fluorescent tubes, and the faces of men who looked at it like a machine. This is where the comparison to Arceus becomes profound. Arceus emerged from an egg in a void of nothingness, and its first act was to create time and space. It had no maker. It had no purpose imposed upon it. It simply was the alpha, the first, the divine. But Mewtwo was born from the needle and the petri dish. Its genesis was not a cosmic event, but a scientific procedure. And yet, the scientists who made it believed they had achieved something that rivaled the divine. They had taken the genetic essence of a mythical ancestor and forged a being of devastating psychic fury. They had created a god, but a god built in their own image of power. But here is the irony. Arceus, for all its unimaginable authority, is part of a tapestry. It has its creation trio, its late guardians, its place in the mythos of Sinnoh. It is worshipped, known, and even in its isolation it belongs. Mewtwo has none of that. It has no siblings, no creator that it loves, no legend that honors it. It has only the memory of the laboratory, the pain of its birth, and the resentment that comes from being a tool. It is perfect, they said, but perfection without belonging is a terrible loneliness, and that is the existential crisis that defines Mewtwo. The creature is trapped between two worlds. It is not a natural Pokémon, emerging from an egg in a tree or a cave. It is not a legendary beast with a temple and a prophecy. It is an artifice, something that should not exist by the rules of the natural mythos, and yet it exists, and it is conscious, and it is angry. In the original film, Mewtwo asks the most human of questions: why was I born? What is my purpose? Those are not questions that Arceus would ever need to ask. Arceus knows its purpose because it wrote the rules. But Mewtwo was written by someone else. In its rage, Mewtwo turned against its creators, destroyed the laboratory, and fled into the world. But the world did not know what to do with it. Was it a villain? A monster? It was something new, something that did not fit the neat categories of Pokémon biology or mythology. It was the artificial god, a being of immense psychic might that could level mountains, control minds, and clone other Pokémon. Yet it had no legend to hold it, no history to root it. Over time, Mewtwo's story evolved. It found a measure of peace, or at least a truce with its existence. It came to understand that its power did not have to be used for destruction, that it could choose its own path. But that choice is itself a reflection of its unnatural origin. Arceus does not choose to be divine, it simply is. Mewtwo must choose every day to be something more than a weapon. And this brings us to a crucial tension in the larger history of mythical Pokémon. When we look at the Pantheon, two distinct threads: the cosmic creation myths and the human-made myths. Arceus represents the first thread, a being whose existence predates time itself. Mewtwo represents the second, a being whose existence is a testament to human ingenuity and hubris. They are two faces of the concept of godhood, one born from nothing, the other built from something. And in the comparison, that true divinity may not be measured in raw power, but in belonging. Mewtwo may be able to rival Arceus in psychic force, but it will never have Arceus's place in the story. The laboratory that created Mewtwo is long gone, but its legacy lingers. The creature itself still exists, somewhere, a spectre of science that refuses to be forgotten. And as we consider the fragmented nature of all these tales, we must ask, what happens when the boundaries between myth and science blur even further? when the legends are not just discovered, but designed? The answer lies in the next chapter, where we will untangle the threads of conflicting timelines and the very nature of canon itself. For now, rest knowing that even the most perfect of creations must find its own meaning, and Mewtwo alone continues to search. We ended the last chapter standing at the crossroads of two very different kinds of power. The artificial perfection of Mewtwo, born from human ambition and science, and the divine sovereignty of Arceus, the first being to emerge from the void. But as we step away from that comparison, a deeper question begins to surface, one that has troubled scholars and historians within the Pokémon world for generations. If Arceus truly created everything, why do the regions of the world remember the dawn of existence so differently? Why does Sinnoh speak of a cosmic egg and a trio of time, space, and antimatter, while Hoenn tells of a clash between continent and sea, and Johto preserves a tale of a pillar that connects the very fabric of reality? The answer lies not in a single truth, but in the nature of how stories travel, how they fracture, and how they are reshaped by the people who tell them. The Pokémon world treats its history not as a static chronicle carved in stone, but as a living, breathing mystery, one that changes with every generation, every discovery, every new pair of eyes that looks upon an ancient ruin. It is a world where the past is never fully settled, where new layers of myth are constantly unearthed, and where the same event can be remembered in a dozen different ways, depending on where you stand. This is the Fragmented Canon, and it is not a flaw in the narrative, it is the narrative itself. Let us begin with the most fundamental question any civilization asks. How did the world begin? In Sinnoh, the answer is cosmic and abstract. An egg appeared in a void, and from it hatched Arceus, who then brought forth Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina to govern time, space, and the antimatter that exists in the spaces between. This version of creation is almost philosophical, concerned with the underlying structure of reality. But cross the sea to Hoenn, and the creation story becomes elemental and violent. Here, the world did not begin with a single egg, but with two primal forces, Groudon and Kyogre, who rose from the depths to shape the land and the sea, their endless battle for dominance threatening to tear the world apart, until Rayquaza descended from the ozone layer to calm them. In this telling, there is no mention of Arceus, no mention of time or space. The world was forged in conflict, not in deliberate design. Why such a stark difference? One explanation is that different regions simply emphasize different aspects of the same primal event. Perhaps Sinnoh's myth focuses on the creation of the cosmic framework, while Hoenn's myth remembers a later chapter, when the physical world was still being shaped by the raw energies that Arceus had set in motion. But there is another possibility, one that the ruins themselves hint at. Perhaps the people of each region only witnessed a fragment of the whole truth, and then built their entire creation mythology around that fragment, filling in the gaps with their own cultural imagination. This is where the Sinjo ruins become crucial. Tucked away in a remote part of Johto, near the border with Sinnoh, this ancient site is one of the few places in the world where different mythic traditions visibly converge. The Sinjo ruins are not dedicated to a single legendary figure. Instead, they feature a central chamber where an image of Arceus is flanked by representations of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, but also by symbols that seem to reference the creation myths of other regions. The walls of the ruins tell a story that does not belong to any one culture. They show the egg, yes, but they also show the shaping of the land and the sea, and they show a pillar that rises into the sky, connecting earth to heaven. It is as if the builders of the Sinjo ruins understood that all these myths are not separate, but are different ways of describing the same cosmic truth. The role of the Sinjo ruins in proving the overlap of different cultural myths cannot be overstated. It is a physical monument to the idea that the Pokémon world's history is not a single timeline, but a tapestry woven from many threads. In the ruins, you can see Groudon and Kyogre depicted not as rivals to Arceus, but as manifestations of the land and sea that Arceus created. You can see the late guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, standing as the spirits of knowledge, emotion, and willpower that were born from the same creative act. The Sinjor ruins suggest that the ancient peoples who built them had access to a broader understanding of creation than any single region preserved. But over time, that understanding fragmented, and each region took the piece that resonated most with its own environment and beliefs. This is how the Pokémon world treats its history, as a living, breathing, and evolving mystery. It is a history that is not locked in a textbook, but whispered in the stones of ruins, echoed in the songs of the Celestic Town elders, and carved into the walls of caves that have not seen sunlight in millennia. It is a history that invites you to explore, to compare, to question. When you read the Sinnoh myth, you are not reading the definitive account. You are reading one version, shaped by the cold climate and the deep caves of that region. When you hear the Hoenn myth, you are hearing a version shaped by endless oceans and volcanic islands. Neither is wrong, but neither is complete. And then there are the stories that seem to come from outside the natural cycle entirely. Consider Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon, whose DNA is said to contain the genetic blueprint of every species that would ever exist. Mew appears in the creation myths of Kanto and Johto, but not as a creator in the same sense as Arceus. Mew is more like a seed, a living library that held the potential for all life. Some scholars have tried to reconcile this with the Arceus myth by suggesting that Arceus created Mew as the first truly living being, a vessel for the diversity that would later flourish. But that is only a theory, not a certainty. The Pokémon world does not give us certainties. It gives us fragments and expects us to piece them together ourselves. This fragmentation is most visible when you look at the so-called mythical Pokémon, the rarest and most mysterious creatures in existence. Their classification as a separate group only became official in Generation 5, but their stories have been told for centuries. Some, like Mew and Arceus, are tied to the very beginning of everything. Others, like Marshadow, are born from the suffering of ancient wars, like the conflict in Kalos, around 3,000 years before the present day. Marshadow is not a creator. It is an observer, a shadow that emerged from the agony of countless lives. That is a very different kind of origin, one rooted in history and trauma, rather than in cosmic design. Then there are the human-made mythical Pokémon, like Mewtwo and Majana, which challenge the very idea of what a myth can be. How can something created in a laboratory be considered mythical? In the Pokémon world, the answer is simple. Because its existence is so extraordinary, so unprecedented, that it becomes the stuff of legend in its own time. The line between natural myth and manufactured myth blurs, and that blurring is deliberate. It forces you to ask whether myth is about truth, or about the awe that truth inspires. The Pokémon world also embraces the idea that myths can change as new information comes to light. Take the story of Regigigas, the titan said to have pulled continents into place. In some accounts, Regigigas is one of Arceus' first creations, a force of pure geological power. In other accounts, it is a later being, perhaps even a creation of ancient humans who worshipped the earth. Neither version has been officially declared correct. The franchise has left the door open, allowing each new generation to reinterpret the past. That is what makes this history feel alive. It is not a dead record. It is a living conversation, one that you, as a listener and a player, are invited to join. And when you stand in the Sinjor ruins, looking at the murals that blend Sinnoh, Johto, and Hoenn iconography, you realize that the architects of that place saw the bigger picture long before us. They understood that the truth is not a single story, but the overlap of many stories. They built a monument to the Fragmented Canon, and in doing so, they left a message for future generations. Do not look for one answer. Look for the connections. Look for the points where the myths touch, where they overlap, where they echo each other. That is where the real history lives. As we drift further into this exploration of origins, The next layer will pull us away from the beginning and toward the cycle that governs all things. The beginning is never the end. The fragments demand to be reassembled. The mystery will not rest until the full pattern, but that pattern, when it finally emerges, will reveal something far older than even the egg from which Arceus hatched. It will reveal the cycle that has no beginning and no end, and it will show us that every return is a new beginning, and every beginning is a return. The Sinjo ruins stand as a strange monument in the heart of the Pokémon world, a place where the myths of Sinnoh and Johto seem to bleed into one another. Here, the fabric of the universe is said to have been stitched together by forces far older than any human record. And if you visit that sacred site in your mind, you can almost feel the weight of the conflicting stories settling into a single, fragile truth. For all the differences between regions, for all the contradictions in the ancient texts, there is a thread that runs through every legend, and it leads back to a moment before time itself. That moment begins in absolute emptiness, not the darkness of a cave or the silence of deep space, but a true void where nothing existed, not even the concept of nothing. And then, from the center of that infinite nothing, an egg appeared. Not a physical egg as we know it, but the seed of all that would ever be. From that egg hatched Arceus, the first being, the one who would shape reality with a thought. In the calm of that creation, Arceus brought forth Dialga to govern the flow of time, Palkia to stretch the boundaries of space, and Giratina to cradle the chaos that exists in the spaces between. And with that, the universe had its foundation. But the hierarchy of mythical Pokémon does not end with that primordial trinity. It reaches upward into the celestial and downward into the smallest mysteries. For Arceus did not simply stop after creating the cosmos. It continued to shape the world, moulding continents with Regigigas, setting the seas and land to war through Groudon and Kyogre, and finally placing gentle guardians like Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf to watch over the minds and hearts of the creatures that would come to inhabit this new world. Each step added a new layer to the hierarchy, a new rung on the ladder from the divine to the tangible. Yet there is another origin story, one that does not begin in the void, but in the laboratory. It is the story of Mew, the ancestor of all Pokémon, a being whose DNA contains the blueprint for every creature that would ever live. Some say Mew was created by Arceus as a seed of life. Others whisper that Mew was the first to emerge from the primordial soup after the creation triad set the stage. But what is certain is that Mew's genetic code holds the echo of the beginning, and from that echo, humans dared to forge their own god. Mewtwo was born not from an egg in the void, but from a test tube in a basement buried deep beneath a mansion on Cinnabar Island. The scientists who created him sought perfection, power, a living weapon that could rival the legends themselves. They succeeded, perhaps too well. Mewtwo represents the reverse of the cycle. Instead of descending from the heavens, he rises from the earth, a manufactured deity whose existence questions the very nature of divinity. And yet, even Mewtwo is bound by the same mystery that surrounds all mythical Pokémon. His origins are documented, his power measured, but his purpose remains elusive. He is a symbol not of creation, but of the unknown consequences of creation. The hierarchy stretches further into the shadows of history and the whispers of ancient wars. Marshadow is said to have risen from the suffering of the Great Callous War thousands of years ago, a being formed from the collective despair of countless souls. Unlike the cosmic entities that exist above the world, Marshadow dwells in the spaces between, lurking in the shadows of other Pokémon, feeding on their emotions. It is a mythical born from trauma, a reminder that the unknown can be both terrifying and deeply human. And then there are the ones crafted by civilization itself. Majana was built in ancient Alola to protect a princess, its metal body infused with a soul stone that gave it life. It is a mythical of human design, yet it bridges the gap between technology and magic, between the laboratory and the legend. Melmetal, too, began as a humble Meltan, a tiny creature of liquid metal that evolved only through the strange mechanics of a mobile game. It is the only mythical that evolves, a testament to the idea that even the rarest beings can change, can grow, can move from the unknown into the known. If you look at this entire hierarchy, from the egg of Arceus in the void to the test tube of Mewtwo in the laboratory, you see a spectrum of mystery. Some of these beings are so ancient that their existence is questioned even within the Pokémon world. Others are so recent that we have video footage of their discovery. Yet they all share one thing in common. They are rare, elusive, and wrapped in layers of doubt. The people of the Pokémon world do not know if Arceus truly created the universe, or if Mew is really the ancestor of all life. They believe, but they do not know, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes these creatures feel so magical. The enduring legacy of mythical Pokémon is not their power or their rarity. It is the fact that they remain symbols of the unknown. In a world where technology can resurrect ancient fossils and capture cosmic beings in a small red and white ball, it is easy to think that everything is within reach, that every secret can be unlocked. But the mythical Pokémon stand apart. They cannot be found by ordinary means. They do not appear in the wild. They come to you through events, through chance, through whispers on the wind. They remind us that there are still mysteries that resist explanation, that some truths are meant to be glimpsed rather than possessed. Why is this mystery essential to the magic of the Pokémon universe? Because without the unknown, the world becomes flat. If every legend were proven, every story confirmed, the sense of wonder would evaporate like morning mist. The question of whether Arceus really exists is more exciting than the answer. The debate over Mew's true nature fuels the imagination. The fear of a shadow lurking in the corner, the hope that maybe a forgotten temple holds a sleeping god. These are the threads that keep the tapestry vibrant. The moment we close the book on every myth, we lose the very reason we opened it in the first place. So here we are, at the end of this journey, through the complete history of mythical Pokémon origins. We have travelled from the void to the laboratory, from the first egg to the last code, from ancient wars to modern adventures. And what have we found? Not a neat timeline, not perfect hierarchy, but a beautiful, tangled web of stories that intertwine and contradict and evolve. That is the eternal cycle. Myths beget new myths, legends fade into fables, and the unknown never truly vanishes. It only changes shape. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let that thought settle over you. The Pokémon world, like our own, is filled with mysteries that will never be fully explained, and that is a gift. The endless cycle of question and wonder, of discovery and doubt, is what keeps the magic alive. Whether you believe in Arceus or Mew, in science or spirit, the truth is that some stories are meant to be told, not solved, and as long as there are dreamers to tell them, the cycle will never end. What did you think of this journey? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this changed your perspective or taught you something new, consider subscribing for more mind-expanding content. And if you know someone who would find this as fascinating as you did, share it with them. These are the kind of conversations that matter.